Okay, it's 4:30. I'm going to call the meeting to order. I'd like to acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, Tla-o-qui-aht and a notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. If there is no objection, I will recommend that the September 28th, 2021 regular council agenda be adopted. Seeing no objections, agenda is adopted. And also, if there's no objection to adopting the consent agenda as prepared for this agenda, I will move adoption. Seeing no objection, the consent agenda is adopted. Item 5, we have public comment on agenda items. And before we do that, just a notice to all attendees that we have a rather full agenda. And so I will be keeping things brief and clear. Public comment on agenda items. Ms. Best, do we have public comment?
Thank you, Mayor Law. Yes, we do have one from Nora Morrison. So Nora, I'm going to elevate you to speak, and she will be making a comment about item number 9.7. So Nora, I'm just going to unmute you for a second here.
Go ahead, Nora. I believe you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Great. So hi, my name is Nora Boileau Morrison, and I know most of the folks on this call as I was born and raised in Tofino. So in 2018, I was appointed by the District of Tofino to sit on the CBT board as an alternate director. So when the plans for a Biosphere Center were initially brought up to the board, I was really excited and enthusiastic about the idea. I think over the years, I've found myself really longing for a resource like this, whether it be through attending university courses on the coast or being involved in different workshops around town. I just felt like the space was really missing. So I think, the need for an accessible community space to gather and learn was always pretty apparent to me, more so over the last few years, but even from a young age, doing different things throughout town. And I also just wanted to say I was really excited about the Olson Road property in particular, because I know myself, the hustle and bustle of the core downtown space is kind of easy to want to avoid these days, but it's still in that accessible space in terms of being able to access it through boat or car. So that space really appealed to me as well. And I also think that I am fairly familiar with the activities that would be hosted in the Biosphere Center. And so in terms of the neighborhoods being accepting of that, I think that as it unfolds, that would be something that wouldn't become a problem just from my experience doing those sorts of activities. So in conclusion, I just really want to encourage you all to approve the zoning bylaw amendment for the property at 301 Olson Road. And thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boileau Morrison. Moving on to, do we have any more? Anybody else signed up for public comment, Ms. Best?
Thank you, Mayor Law. No, there's no other signups.
Okay, perfect. Mayor's report. We did have a fantastic UBCM attended by council virtually, and council did meet with many of the ministries. In fact, we met with the BC Hydro, not a ministry, but we met with them, BC Hydro, about upgrading our services, the Minister of Education. We met with the Minister of Tourism, Arts, Culture, and Sport. We met with the Public Safety and Solicitor General. We met with the Minister of Health, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, the Minister of State for Childcare, and we met with the Minister of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. We also met with the Minister of Finance, and we met with the Attorney General and Minister responsible for housing, and those were very productive meetings, and we look forward to following up many of our requests and asks in the coming weeks, and some of those meetings are already being scheduled, so thank you very much. We also had just yesterday, Sharp Road development, we had the ceremony for Creekside, Tofino's first affordable non-market housing development through the THC and Catalyst. We're very excited about that, and we look forward to more ceremonies and celebrations as we see non-market affordable housing come to Tofino. I believe we have delegations. Moving right on, we have a delegation from Rebecca Hurwitz, Executive Director of Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust, to speak to the CBT development. And Ms. Best, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Law. I'm just moved Rebecca so she can speak. Rebecca, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, great. So you have 10 minutes to present. And is there any other speakers that you have in attendance today?
Yes, Bob Freneveau and Asher de Groot are also going to join me in the presentation. And I think if it's possible for Asher to share his screen and just page through the presentation.
Okay.
That seemed to work well last time.
Can you repeat that name? I'm not seeing that on the attendance list here, unless they have a different name.
Bob Freneveau.
Oh, okay, yep.
And Asher de Groot.
Okay. All right, I think everyone's in now. If you'd like to unmute, and Bob, you should be able to share your screen.
It's actually Asher that needs to share his screen.
Okay. All right, we are all good now. I'll leave it up to you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got asked to rejoin and now I'm back. So can you still see me and hear me? Yeah. Okay, awesome, we're on?
Yes.
You're on, you're live.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide an update on the Biosphere Center. My name is Rebecca Hurwitz, Executive Director of the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust, and I'm joined by one of the project architects, Asher de Groot, and project manager, Bob Freneveau. Our goal this afternoon is to inspire you, to review the building design, and to provide an update on our activities since first reading. As you know, the CBT was formed 21 years ago to be the steward of the Tla-o-qui-aht Sound Biosphere designation. We are one of 19 biospheres in Canada and 727 worldwide. The CBT is also the region's community foundation and the only organization in Canada, perhaps worldwide, to embrace this dual mandate. You can page forward too, I think, Asher. We have an important story to tell, and it's vital that residents and visitors understand the global significance of our region as well as our history, so that together we can shape a positive and inclusive future. The CBT established the vision to create a permanent home in 2008 with the goal to have a transformative impact in our communities and ecosystems through knowledge exchange, education, and research. The center will serve more than the CBT. It will be a place to unite people to achieve our shared vision and values and a nexus of education, science, conservation, and cultural initiatives on the West Coast. We are inspired by our many partners, youth, elders, and the natural world. We're also inspired by other UNESCO Biosphere Centers worldwide, including those shown here in Sweden and Ireland. I've learned from colleagues about how their unique centers have helped them to achieve their visions. These iconic buildings create a connection between people and place, and the goals of these projects speak to the role of UNESCO Biospheres worldwide, including research, community development, education, inspiring change, and conservation through culture. The center will be a marker for the Biosphere designation and convey the significance of our region to locals and visitors alike. You can page forward, Asher. In 2019, the CBT purchased a property in Tofino on the corner of Campbell Street and Olson Road, which you can see highlighted here at the bottom of the screen. We've been actively searching for a permanent home since 2014, when we were invited by Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation to continue to locate the Biosphere Center in their territory. At that time, the board established a set of criteria, and we felt that the institutional uses were well aligned with the OCP and compatible with the current land uses of this property along Campbell Street and Olson Road. Over to you, Asher.
So the building design that you see here has not changed significantly from what it was a year ago, but I'll just run through it quickly. So there's obviously the CBT and their partner office space and archives associated with that. There's also some community gathering space on the second floor. In addition to that, there's also residential 2 units that are part of the project. I'll let Bob speak to that more later. And so the building massing really orients the public-facing components of the project towards Campbell Street, and a smaller mass of the residential units oriented towards Olson Road, where there are residential homes along that side. And the building really acts as a buffer to Campbell Street from the residences down the way, and all of the public-facing components face Campbell Street and don't have windows that look out onto those residential properties to the north. So just briefly to go through the plan, the ground floor at the lower level provides for all of the parking requirements from the District of Tofino that would be required for this project. And at grade on Campbell Street, there's a bit of a buffer of landscape to provide for pedestrians and some protection from both the multi-use pathway and traffic, which is quite busy along Campbell. The main floor of the building contains open offices for CBT and its partners, a welcoming front area, and also a room dedicated to elders that would utilize the site. As I'd mentioned, there's also 2 modest residential units which face Olson Road and have their own kind of private patios, and those are single bedroom modest units. The upper level of the building, again, faces primarily to the south, and there's a large gathering space for 40 people, a teaching kitchen, and 2 outdoor areas, one that's covered and one that's more exposed to the south, that are connected to those spaces for community events. So what you've seen here was submitted to council a year ago, and we wanted to update you on the work that has been done since that time in the last 11.5 months since we presented. So I'll let Bob talk through a few things here.
One of the items that we've been working very closely with the district staff on is to negotiate a housing agreement that would form the basis of a housing bylaw. And that agreement essentially secures those 2 very modest residential housing units and sets the eligibility criteria for the tenants. Our primary objective of including those units is to provide employee housing for CBT and for its partners. And as we all know, affordable housing in Tofino is a high community priority. The housing agreement also provides that the units cannot be used for short-term or overnight accommodation, and they'll not be converted for any other use for the life of the building. So this is a very strong commitment by CBT to ensuring that these units remain dedicated for employee housing. Next slide, Asher. One of the other exciting pieces of work that we've undertaken is a partnership with Bisocial Canada, recognizing that the Biosphere Centre represents a tremendous opportunity for economic and social impacts in the communities that are served by the Biosphere Trust, both in terms of the initial construction and development and also the ongoing operations. And our immediate work, along with Bisocial Canada and community stakeholder partners, is to develop a social procurement framework that meshes well with the district's own policies and ensures that the social and economic benefits of the center are maximized for the community.
And one of the components that was required between first and second reading from the district that we've provided is traffic impact assessment. And 2 important things to note on that. The full report was provided to the district, but 2 things to note are that the study for this project obviously took place during COVID, but Bunton Associates, who's the firm that completed that work, took into account that this took place during COVID, and so they've made multipliers based on their experience both in Tofino and elsewhere during the pandemic to provide what they thought was a robust calculation for what a regular non-COVID, non-pandemic time traffic would be for that. So that's all included in their report. And what their report found more broadly for the project was that it would actually have a fairly minimal impact on this intersection in particular. There's neighbors who are concerned about safety and about turning times and that sort of thing, but they found that the project actually had little to no impact on entries or exits from Olsen Road, but that's included more fully in their report. And secondly, we were also provided a servicing brief by McElhenney, which again showed that the existing infrastructure that the district has, sanitary, storm, etc., that this project, both its residential and its office and community gathering components, would not tax that system in any way that it couldn't handle, and also provides for integrating into the storm system, which is being upgraded at the moment on Olsen Road. And finally, several weeks ago, we also hosted an open house online that invited neighbors and broader community members to reintroduce them to the project and answer any questions that they had at that time. So that was several weeks ago. And just a brief look at what we're anticipating for this project should Council approve it for the next steps following today's discussion.
Thank you very much. I think the Biosphere Center is an opportunity to shine a light on our region as an international leader in environmental conservation, sustainable development, education, science, and reconciliation. So together we can tell our story through the creation of this knowledge hub and UNESCO Visitor Center purpose-built in our region. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this update on the direction that you'd provided at first reading.
Thank you for that presentation. Very good. We're going to, do we have any questions for our presenters? We're going to move on to 7.2, delegation from Peter and Ashley Clark from Wild Pod Glamping regarding temporary use permit for renewal for Wild Pod Glamping.
Thank you, Mayor Law. I'm just removing our previous panelists and adding these new ones. Just give me one moment here for everyone. Just a little quick. Okay, so.
Are Peter and Ashley Clark?
Yeah, they might be on the same feed here, so we'll see in 1 second here.
I see Mr. Clark. I see his name.
I look like I'm getting somewhere.
There's a face. Two faces.
Yeah, we might have 3 or 4 faces by the end of it. So first of all, apologies in advance. If we have any interruptions, we have our 2 6-week-old twins with us in the room, and they're not always, they don't always follow the schedule, essentially, if we've learned one thing already. So I do apologize for any noises or background noises. I just want to say good afternoon to the Mayor and members of the Council. We are Pete and Ashley, and we run Wild Pod Glamping. We know some of you already through our previous application and as our time living as a family in Tofino. We're here today as part of our TUP renewal application, and to give you a very brief overview as to how we plan to utilize the next 3 years in terms of moving forward with a permanent solution. We know it's a very packed agenda, so we'll try and keep this as brief as possible and to the point. And for those who know me, will understand that's pretty difficult for me. It doesn't come naturally, but I will try. I'd like to give you a little bit of background as to why we want to extend the TUP at this point. We were open for a business for just around 12 months before the pandemic hit. During that first year of business, we feel we were very much able to show proof of concept for viable and successful business, and that there was demand for something that we were providing. And we were very grateful to have had such an overwhelmingly positive response from locals and from visitors from both near and far. Our main aim was to create somewhere peaceful, eco-friendly, and that would allow our visitors the spectacular views of such an amazing location with such incredible nature and wildlife, while being able to be walking distance for so many of the elements that Tofino has that make it so special. There aren't many places in the world where you can wake up and see whales from bed or having a morning coffee, and we really wanted to share that with as many people as we could. We had already begun very preliminary talks with Peter in planning and external consultants about our next steps towards rezoning, only to then be closed for almost 10 months over the remainder of 2020-2021, which brought much uncertainty and has certainly been a major factor in delaying any rezoning initiation. In the 3 years of our TUP, we've been able to be open as a business for 2 years. Being full-time residents of Tofino and raising our growing family here, we feel we have a very good idea and our finger on the pulse somewhat of what the town would like to see in terms of new projects and developments. And we are very much aware that a large resort condominium building on such a beautiful and small piece of land is not it. We strongly believe the current usage is more respectful to the land, has minimal environmental impact, and is much more in keeping with the infrastructure limitations the town faces and the general strain that another resort condo building would bring at this time. The current zoning could bring upwards of 100 people to that small piece of land, in contrast to the 12 we currently allow, not to mention the environmental impact of blasting, building, etc. Our plan would be to utilize the next TUP period to put in a rezoning application that will allow us something similar to our current operation, whilst including some enhancements that would be suitable for making the business a permanent one. We are eco-friendly, certified ocean-friendly business through the local Surfrider chapter. We're Tribal Park allies. We support many local businesses, both directly through use of their products and services, and indirectly via encouraging all of our guests to fully engage with everything Tofino has to offer. We also are community-minded and have supported many charitable causes such as Pacific Rim Hospice Society, Wickaninnish Pack, Surfrider, Multiplex, Saltwater Classic Fundraiser, and many more. Whilst, according to some, we might not be able to call ourselves locals yet, this is very much our home and will continue to be our home. We're raising our children here and our growing family. We care strongly about this town, and we want to have as much of as positive an impact as we can, both personally and through our business. And therefore, we'd look to be using the next 3 years and to engage very quickly with planning in terms of how we can, put something there that the town can continue to be proud of, we can be proud of, and that we think is more in keeping with the natural landscape and what Tofino really needs right now. And I think that's about it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thanks for not interrupting.
And you were well under your 10-minute time limit, by the way. So you did a very, you came through.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move along to correspondence, and I'll just thank you, Ms. Best. We have a correspondence from Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce, and it's a letter to the province of BC regarding vaccination passports. Thank you for that letter. Any comments from council? Seeing none, we'll move along. We have presentations and reports. We have an invited presentation from Alice Hoyland. This is Youth Coordinator for Surfrider regarding Cut the Cutlery. And this is, I believe, a request to amend the single-use plastics regulation bylaw. So, Ms. Best, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Law. Alice, I've just promoted you to panelist. With an invited presentation, you have up to 15 minutes to present. And Alice, do you have any other members of Surfrider with you today?
Yeah, Amarita, our chair, is here as well. If we could
All right.
upgrade her permissions, thanks.
All right. And looks like everyone's good to go.
Wonderful. I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay. See if I can find my presentation. It's not the right thing, is it? No. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Let me. Here it is. Wonderful. And Amarita, are you here too?
Yes, Alice, I'm here.
Fabulous. Okay, there we go.
Great, thank you. Hi, Mayor and Council. Most of you know me. I'm Amarita, and I'm also the chair of Surfrider Pacific Rim. And I'm here with Alice, my colleague, whom I will let her introduce herself quickly here.
Yeah, my name's Alice Hoyland. I am 50% of the staff team for Surfrider Pacific Rim. I've been working for the chapter for the last couple of years. I mostly am in charge of youth programming and the beach clean program, but also get my hands into the many other pots that we have going.
Yeah, so we just want to say thank you for the invitation to come speak today to you about our Cut the Cutlery campaign, which would be adding cutlery, single-use plastic cutlery and bioplastic to the single-use plastic regulation bylaws. So very briefly, I'm sure you're all familiar with Surfrider and Surfrider and Surfrider Pacific Rim and what we do, but we are a very active, powerful network of volunteers, and we are focused here not solely, but with the intention of protection of the ocean, beaches, and waves. So we have three main pillars that we're focused on with our specific chapter. The first is ending plastic pollution. So that would be this example, cut the cutlery. There would also be ban the bag and straws suck as some other examples. Implementing circular solutions for local waste and pollution issues. So opportunities for finding reusable things for businesses, as well as waste diversion. And the third, engaging youth, individuals, businesses, and government in ocean-friendly initiatives. So examples of that would be our youth environmental stewardship, ocean-friendly businesses, as well as our beach cleanups that I'm sure everybody is very familiar with.
Yeah, so we tend to focus on plastics for our chapter, and that's mostly because we're a coastal community and it's hard to ignore when you walk at the beach, especially in the wintertime here, that we're very much living through a plastic pollution epidemic right now. We've had our first storm of the season. I'm sure we'll start to see those microplastics washing in with every tide. What we don't talk about as much is the fact that plastic is a problem throughout the entirety of its life cycle. So we're very familiar with the end of life issues, but even from the very beginning, from the extractive processes of getting those building blocks of plastic, which tend to be fossil fuels, which are incredibly pollutive, to the problems in transportation and the pollution that causes, to ethane crackers when it comes to actually producing plastic, which pollute the air, the water, the land, even before it's even a product, right? And then put on top of that are insufficient end of life processes, which lead to a abysmal 9% recycling rate in Canada. We end up with 11 million tons. Yeah, 11 million tons of plastic entering the ocean every year, which is quite frightening when you think about it. So one of the things that we are passionate about here on Pacific Rim is doing what we can to minimize the plastic that is going into the ocean in the first place, not just beach clean, but taking upstream solutions. And a really big part of that is working closely with council and council staff to look at regulations that we can put in place to minimize our plastic input as a community. So ban the bag, straw suck were really great examples of that, looking at single-use plastics that we can eradicate. We're here today to ask to add cutlery to that regulation. Cutlery, plastic and bioplastic, it's one of those single-use plastics that's designed to be used for once or a very short amount of time and then thrown away, and it's going to persist in our environment for a very, very long time. Bioplastic actually is one of those insidious ones that people think is great, but actually it's not compostable locally, and when it does end up in the recycling stream, it actually downgrades the quality of the whole recycling and often ends in whole bunches of recycling going to landfill. So bioplastic is also awful. So plastic and bioplastic cutlery, one of those single-use plastics that we are hoping to add to our regulation. So To do that, we went through the same blueprint that we used to ban the bag and straw suck. We worked in a collaborative way with our business community to find solutions, alternative solutions that are locally manageable within our waste streams. And I'll pass over to Anne-Marie to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Alice. So to support the businesses in this, the first thing that we wanted to look at was what were businesses using. Plastic, bioplastic, bamboo, wooden cutlery. So just getting a sense of who is using what in town, and then getting feedback from them as well. So one of the ways that we look to support all of the different businesses was to take that feedback and then turn it and turn it to the manufacturers. So you can see an example here talking about wooden spoons and how they don't stand up to the heat. So we actually took that feedback to the manufacturer, and then we're able to have the spoons created differently so that they would be more useful and likely to have better compliance from the businesses. Financially as well, having spent some of the Surfrider money on wooden cutlery to provide to businesses in town as an opportunity for them to use that. And happy to say that towards the end of the campaign, we were managed to convert 22 businesses in Ucluelet and 22 businesses in Tofino. And as Alice mentioned, one of the big goals with this campaign and with all the Surfrider campaigns is in compliance is more about the collaborative nature with the businesses. So this means that we want to check in with other stakeholders, one of those being the Community of Economic Development Advisory Committee, or CDAC, which I actually had the pleasure of sitting on at the time that Lily Woodbury came in and talked to us about this. So an interesting position of being in that seat when we went through this example of building a deposit system. So there'd be forks and knives around all of the different businesses that people then could go and grab and return. And with the conversation at CDAC, we found that it wouldn't create a really equitable playing field for all those businesses. So Surfrider then turned around and redesigned the campaign, voluntarily eliminating plastic and bioplastic, supplying reusable cutlery for in-house use, and then offering compostable takeaway cutlery on request, and potentially even charging for that, as a lot of businesses do for bags and things like that. And then the other option, which would be to sell reusable cutlery as an example. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this because you can read through all of these ways that we have supported the businesses. A couple points I just want to raise that we did do a survey through the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce. All of the businesses, 100% of the businesses said that they supported a ban on cutlery, as well as all of our ocean friendly certified businesses. But I think that the point that we really want to raise here, or the takeaway here, is that there was greater compliance in the business community than we saw with plastic straws and bags when those bans were implemented. And I think that this speaks to the fact that there is a changing in philosophy or ethos in the business community here, that people are now making different decisions about how they want to run their businesses.
Awesome, thanks, Amrita. So yeah, I guess we're here today with really exciting and great news, really, in that in the 5 years that we've been campaigning on single-use plastics on the Pacific Rim, we really are starting to see this shift in culture with our business community. We've got an incredibly engaged, incredibly supportive business community here that are excited to work in a way that protects this beautiful place that we get to call home, and that's really exciting. So we're here today to say that we feel like we're ready to add cutlery to the regulation. We've got great support from our business community. We know we've got great support from our community at large, and also we're excited to keep moving forward. We are working with council and with our business community to look at other single-use plastic items that businesses are ready to move away from, whether that be ramekins, coffee cup lids, plastic stirrers, all these single-use plastic items that we are more than ready to get rid of. But today we're here to ask specifically for cutlery. We think we're ready. Business community also supports us in that, and we hope that you agree too. So thank you so much for making time to hear us today, and we really look forward to taking this next step forward together. Thanks.
Thank you very much for all your hard work on this and success. Turning to council, do we have any questions for our invited presenters? No. Oh, we do have one question, Councillor Steer.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I do have a question and maybe a suggestion. But I first of all want to just acknowledge and thank Alice as the youth coordinator. Her work has been phenomenal. My children have benefited incredibly from it, and not only mine, but many of the people at the Tla-o-qui-aht Secondary School and in Tofino here as well. And Amarita as well, to acknowledge taking on a leadership role with Surfrider and from Michelle's position there. It's wonderful to have you there. We can you've got such great background. This perfect positioning for you. I of course am going to support 100% as much as I can on bringing forward this single-use plastic regulation, and just commend you guys once again on the incredible thoroughness of the work that you do in bringing these forward to council. You make our decisions very informed and, to be honest, quite easy in some ways. I did, in part of the regulation report, near the bottom of it, and sort of, there was a call out to council about what to campaign on next. And one of the things that I think you guys have kind of given us a bit of a lead on that and what might be the next ones there. And within that, there are some bioplastics that you thought might be possible to start looking at next. And I did have a quick suggestion, because sitting on the ACRD board, and a lot of their responsibility is our landfill. And I don't know if you made the connection directly with them, but and I don't know if there's quantitative data, but certainly anecdotally, they might be able to help in delineating what they're seeing coming through in terms of the volume of waste that we might want to focus our attention on next, as it's critically important for the landfill for many reasons, but also obviously for the environment as well. So that was just a quick sort of observation and a comment on where we might start looking, and that might be an area that might help us define it a little better. So I thank you guys once again, and I'll move on from there. Take care.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Steer. I don't want to take up any more time. I know you've got a really packed agenda. We are working really closely with the ACRD, and absolutely 100% those reports that we have from the landfill definitely inform our work for sure.
Excellent. Any other comments from council? We do have a couple options. We have a recommendation here, but in conversation with our acting CAO, Ms. Atiana, there is also the option simply to direct staff to move forward in conjunction with UKI. So I'm going to look. Is Ms. Atiana on here? Where is her? I'm just going to look to you. We could either do this recommendation as it's in the agenda, or we can simply direct staff to move forward. I think we're all very much in support. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to move the recommendation in the agenda, and that'll give staff the direction they need.
Excellent. Would somebody like to move that? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll make the recommendation, if I can read it here, that staff be directed to bring forth amendments to District of Tofino single-use item regulation bylaw number 1277/2020 to include cutlery.
Seconded by Councillor Challenger. Any further comments? All in favor? Excellent work. Thank you. Hope to see more. Moving right along, 9.2, we have invited presentation from Sandy McKay, Housing Research and Policy Lead with Macola Development Services. And this is regarding West Coast housing need and demand study.
Thank you, Mayor Law. I'm just going to move some people around here in our meeting. It looks like I'm not seeing Sandy on our attendee list right now.
Nikki?
Yes.
I think Julie Edney, who's with Macola, is going to present in his stead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we have, looks like there was two in here. So can we see both of
Hello.
these?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And see you.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me today.
Let me just go ahead and share my screen. All right. Okay, can you see my screen? Awesome. Great. So thank you so much for having me.
Sorry, Miss, we can see you, but we can't see your screen.
I will try this again.
Now we can. Excellent.
Okay, great. All right, so won't burn any more of your time. So here we go. So we've put together a preliminary data report on the West Coast Housing Need and Demand Study. And before I get into much of the detail, I wanted to give you an overview of what you can and can't expect from this research. What you can expect is information related to what is happening in the housing sector locally, who it's happening to, and high-level policy recommendations based on our findings. We'll be sharing the results with the wider community in a public forum once this report is ready to be published, though that may not be in person because of COVID. So another important to note is what not to expect in this report, and that is related to specific advice on actual housing proposals or permits. It is up to local government to decide how to enact our recommendations. And one important thing to remember here is that there are no easy answers. The local situation is certainly highly nuanced, and it will be up to council to determine what to do with the information we present you with. Another important note is that there is funding available through UBCM for this study, but no guarantees for the next one. So hopefully we're leaving with Tofino with the tools they need to conduct the next one internally. So here we have some preliminary findings that outline the recorded and projected population and household growth for Tofino. These statistics are based on 2016 census data, which is far from perfect, but should be improving with this year's census, and has been extrapolated based on provincial and regional trends. Overall, what we're expecting is the number of households to increase, but fewer people living in each one. In other words, Tofino will need more houses for less people in the future. And as the population ages, families get smaller, this is natural decline. Now, in terms of where that growth is happening, we're seeing it entirely driven by migration. So that's because the municipality is experiencing that natural decline. So births not making up for deaths. Unfortunately, this data is only available for the entire ACRD, but this type of growth is common across BC, as every year average family sizes are shrinking. But it is worth noting that most of the people migrating to the region are settling in Tofino, as well as Ucluelet and Port Alberni. Now, in terms of who is living here, the data shows that the structure of the population is changing. Tofino has an aging population. In 2006, only 6% of the population was over 65, but by 2026, close to 24% of the population will be over 65. Tofino has the next 15 years or so to figure out how to intervene to support an aging population. This is more favorable than other communities that we're seeing, which will likely quickly have over 30% of their population over 65 and needing additional supports. And though your population is getting older, you'll still have over 50% of your population between the ages of 25 to 64, or that prime working age group available to support you. And it's also important not to forget about that growing light gray area on the graph. This data is supported by our interview and survey data showing that one of the issues Tofino's facing is seniors who are reaching the age where that older group at 85 plus that need additional healthcare services and are not being able to remain in the community because those aren't available. Digging into this, the cost of ownership is a keystone issue for Tofino and increasingly the West Coast region as a whole. Even adjusting for inflation, Tofino's cost of ownership for any form of housing has risen sharply in the last couple of years. Obviously, Tofino prices have been consistently the highest in the region for well over the past 10 years, and they are continuing to rise with no signs of flattening out anytime soon. Now, this graph breaks Tofino prices down by sorting out a variety of unit types. Here we've identified that Tofino has seen a 115% jump in single detached prices since 2011. Average price in 2016 was $700,000. In 2020, it was $1.6 million, and it's likely to be even higher this year. Prices are snowballing. What this also tells us is that even the more affordable places like row houses and apartments in that higher density range are increasingly out of reach for the average family. The challenges associated with this situation lie in the monetary asset of the home. Tofino is not actually getting any more actual community benefit out of those rising prices. So we need to remind people of who these spikes in prices are hurting, which is everyone, but in particular, it's young families who are hoping to enter the ownership market. Tofino is lucky to have some pretty reliable rental data thanks to Coastal Family Resource Coalition's famous R. She's done a great job of collecting the rental information for Tofino over the past few years. And we're seeing now that 3-bedroom units have gone up 51% in the last 5 years. So these rates are quickly inching up to the rates seen in major urban centers like Victoria and Vancouver. So the cost of ownership combined with increasing rental rates makes it harder and harder for people to enter the ownership market. Moving into our housing survey, our Tofino survey responses indicate that 35% of all respondents indicated that their current housing did not meet their needs. The situation is quite concerning for a bulk of the population, where in particular, people are concerned about stability. So they're not sure if they're going to be able to remain in their current housing, and where would they go next. It's a really difficult question to answer when the vacancies are as low as they have been. So here are a few quotes that we picked out just to highlight those real stories of coming from residents in your community that communicate the mental, emotional, and social toll that, as well as commercial toll that the housing crunch has placed on the region. So in the bottom left corner, I have a great landlord that provides us with very affordable rent. I also have a career that pays well. Even so, as a single parent, my rent is half of my paycheck, not leaving money for other expenses. And most of the other half goes to childcare. And the bottom right, we have the business owner's story here. I own a restaurant in town, and it has become almost impossible to find employees because there is nowhere for them to live. So we wanted to include this because we are hearing a lot through this study about the difficulties associated with running a business when no one can find housing for their staff. And so there's a real shortage across the board, but it is definitely having an impact on local businesses as well. So over the 12 interviews and 9 focus groups we've conducted with local partners in the housing, health, social service, and commercial sectors to gauge the general sense of housing in the West Coast region. We've identified some clear themes related to housing need and demand in Tofino, many of which are common across the region. But first, there's a very real and drastic supply shortage here. Rising housing costs and reduced availability of long-term rentals as homes are sold or converted to short-term vacation rental is continuing to squeeze an already extremely tight rental market in Tofino. Often before affordability was even mentioned, supply was emphasized. Even for those who could afford typical rents, it wasn't available anyways. Rental vacancies are so hard to come by that we're hearing stories of residents being forced to remain in unsafe tenancies with predatory landlords or risk living in housing conditions that are physically unsafe for residents with mobility challenges, all because there are no other options available to them locally and they can't afford to move. The theme of workforce housing is closely tied to this shortage, but we want to highlight it on its own. As I mentioned, it was frequently identified as a key challenge for the community as a whole due to the broad range of workers that are struggling to find housing. Essential workers like doctors, nurses, and childcare staff are struggling. Then there's the persistent shortage of staff in the tourism and hospitality sector, which came up frequently as being largely attributed to shortage of affordable rental supply. Utilities costs also came up as an added pressure on housing. A lot of houses are still being heated by wood, and the cost of that has gone through the roof this year. Development challenges like limited land availability, servicing pressures like local water supply reaching its carrying capacity, and the high cost of building all make it really tricky to deliver new and affordable housing on the West Coast. But we hope to see some regional collaboration on this front in the coming years to help overcome these barriers. Governments are also not being set up for success, unfortunately, by higher orders of government. So here we're acknowledging that challenges for municipalities to navigate the ever-evolving systems put in place by the province, creating additional burdens without additional funding to compensate. Finally, a change in mindset and stigma reduction around poverty and mental health were highlighted as important areas for growth to help counter the pushback from some homeowners when important opportunities to address supply issues are brought forward. There's an important opportunity here for some education around the need to house vulnerable population groups like youth aging out of care and people struggling with mental health and addictions. So moving forward, the Macola team will be putting the finishing touches on our engagement analysis and drafting a report to synthesize the qualitative and quantitative data we've collected into a summary with some key recommendations for Council to consider. We'll then review that report with staff and collect their feedback, package it up into an attractive and accessible format, and then present again to Council. Finally, and one of the most valuable deliverables we've included as part of our services is hosting a capacity building workshop for staff, in which we'll be reviewing the process of conducting a housing needs assessment and equipping staff with the tools to conduct the next one in-house. If you have any questions about these forthcoming items, you can always reach out to Erin or Sandy or myself at Macola. That concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm available as well as my colleague Sandy. I believe he is on the line. We can answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Excellent work. Thank you very much. It was great chatting with you about this during this process as well. Do we have any questions or comments for Julie or Sandy? We do have one. Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
You mentioned additional burdens placed on municipalities by the province. Do you know offhand, to be more specific on that, what sort of things you speak of?
Sure, I can take that. Thanks, Councillor Anderson. It's a really good question. So when we talk about the burden of supplying housing, it typically is a provincial, it's a provincial responsibility, right? But one of the challenges with addressing housing need is that housing needs always manifest at a local level. It's very difficult to see housing needs in Tofino when you are governing a province from Victoria. Housing needs are always the thing that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. You're the ones who see them, you're the ones who understand them the most, and you're the ones who know how best to address them. So the province has given you some additional support in terms of funding for projects like this, but routinely local governments are saying that the competitive process to navigate BC housing to access funding, additional competitive processes to attract funding through organizations like the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation are insufficient. And certainly the number of dollars that are filtering down to local levels to actually address some of these supply issues are a challenge. So that's kind of what we're meeting, is that issues about housing are coming to you as councillors and mayor first. They're not going directly to the province, and it's really following more and more on councils and local governments to integrate housing into their daily operations as a government, which is not something that really happened 10, 15, even 5 years ago to the same degree.
Great answer. Excellent answer. Thank you. Any other questions or comments for these fine folks? Councillor Thick.
Yeah, just to say thank you. I think it was nice, short, to the point, and very informative. And I was very surprised to see that number in the 65 to 84 age group. And that makes me think, being one of those numbers, just what it means for planning and what we need to do in our community going forward. So I just thank you for bringing that to our attention, and the whole report was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just like extend my thanks as well. Thank you very much.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Hang on for one moment here, everyone. I just moved the mayor out of our meeting and I'm moving him back in now.
You got me.
Apologies, Mayor Law.
Out. That's okay. It's all great. Super. So let's move right on. 9.3 development variance permit for 598 Pfeiffer Crescent, and this is a report, but not a presentation. Is it? Is that correct? Or we have a presentation? Excellent.
Thank you, Mayor Law. I have, I think, 6 reports or 7 reports today, and 5 of them will have presentations, and the other 2 will not. So I'll step through them quite quickly. So the first presentation of the evening from the Community Sustainability Department is a development variance permit for 598 Pfeiffer Crescent. If we're not familiar with the location, it is located on Pfeiffer Crescent and highlighted here in the dashed red lines. The current use, it's vacant. It's about 1/6 of an acre, a standard city lot. The zoning is R1, which permits a single family dwelling and a suite. The future land use of the area is village, exactly what's been proposed. And it is within a development permit area for steep slopes, but it is exempt because the steep slopes DPA is only is only addressed at time of subdivision, not building permit. Again, it's a vacant cleared lot. The applicant's design is consistent with the neighboring 3-story properties on both sides of Pfeiffer. Yeah, there is a natural, I think we're all familiar with the topography there. It's fairly steep. The applicant is applying to have what is in essence a basement permitted as a story, so that they can put a secondary suite in there and factor in that sloping grade. And we at staff believe that this will maximize the housing potential for the lot. In terms of the R1 zone itself, the applicant is meeting or exceeding all the requirements in terms of their setbacks, their lot coverage. They're under height, even with the addition of the story. and we'll provide a number of parking spaces on site as well. Really briefly, Local Government Act allows us to, as a council, or you as a council, ask the district to issue a development variance permit that varies a zoning bylaw, and the proposal does align with our current OCP and land use in the village designation. So the applicant is, in terms of the variance itself, is going to vary part 8.6 of the District of Tofino zoning bylaw 770 to increase the maximum permitted stories for a principal dwelling in an R1 zone from 2 to 3. Attached to the report and the DVP itself as Exhibit A is the designs for the house. And just wanted to note that the 3-story structure will be 4 feet under the zoning height for the area. So considerations that council may want to take into account is first off the size and location of the secondary suite. If this development variance permit were to be turned down, is most likely that the building will be developed very similarly as it is now, but instead of having a walkout 2-bedroom secondary suite, we potentially have a box filled with gravel, or potentially a garage for parking cars. And so in terms of the form and character of the area, most, if not all, the houses along the back side, the north side of Pfeiffer, have this type of walkout basement. If the application for variance does not go forward, it's my understanding that the applicant would probably seek to look to move the secondary suite into the main house area, and so most likely at that point either expand the footprint of the house, expand the height of the house, or potentially reduce the secondary suite to a smaller area to accommodate that use. In terms of other guidelines, the application, as demonstrated on the slide before, meets all of our setbacks and height requirements. One item I wanted to mention for council's edification, and I think understanding the area, is that the R1 zone most likely comes out of a suburban zone somewhere flat that was adopted by Tofino 20 to 30 years ago. The R1 zone and our bylaw in general doesn't account well for topography, and so we sometimes will see applications like this, similar to the one we saw across the street a couple months ago, that look for a variance to try to work with that slope. In terms of public notification and consultation, we have a standard process for that. That was followed, and the DVP was made available through the planning department. We received a number of items of feedback from the community. 6 responses in opposition, so 5 were from the Gibson Street strata below, and 1 was from another single-family dwelling on Pfeiffer Street. There were concerns for increased noise, decreased light, and privacy. And while I don't want to speak against the opinions of the neighborhood, this development is going to, from Pfeiffer, first off, will look exactly like any of the other buildings there. It has rights. It has the right to have a single family home, and it has a right to have a dwelling. That's going to happen. So there'll be more noise than there is now because it's a vacant lot, but not more noise than we've planned for. And then in terms of the Gibson Street condos, there seems to be a bit of a concern that it's somehow going to block out noise, block out light. I don't think that's completely accurate. I know it's very difficult to see the buildings on Pfeiffer from the Gibson condos, and nonetheless, the building again will have the rights to be, actually taller than what it is, and could be a fair amount wider. So the applicant has opted to build narrower and taller if they're permitted, rather than a little bit taller and much wider. We've had 1 application in support from another single-family dwelling on Gibson Street, who I can read here, but wholeheartedly approves the increased density and additional rental opportunity. I just want to comment that there is no increased density. It's just an additional story to accommodate the 2 uses that are currently permitted in that zone. So as far as the staff recommendation, we're recommending approval of the development variance permit to permit a 3rd story. That does it for this presentation, and happy to take any questions or comments.
I'll get you to Okay, perfect. So if we have questions for Mr. Rogers, I'm going to just reiterate to council that this is a time for questions, not comments. So if you have comments, I would like you to refrain and put the comments in the appropriate time. So questions for Mr. Rogers for this variance permit. Councillor Thick.
Yes, thank you. I just had a concern or a question, I suppose, about the 5 parking spots. I'm just wondering why an R1 house with a single secondary suite would need 5 parking spots, and potentially the impact that would have in terms of losing buffer and losing treed area on the property that would maybe be advantageous from a neighbor's point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Thick. Great question. There is a minimum parking requirements, and I believe for this use, the minimum would be 4 spaces. And so we've seen a lot of variances up actually on the New Gibson Heights subdivision to allow for that parking. So it's partly to do with our requirements. If someone was to take full advantage of their zone, which would include the short-term rental use or bed and breakfast use. And so for those types of uses, you require more parking. So that's driven generally by our zoning bylaw and our business license bylaw.
Thank you. And I did drive by the property in question and noticed that it was, it was quite a barren piece of land. And also, just how do we account for, account for buffers between these large houses on slopes such as this, or in any case? I'm just noticing with the applications in this, in today's agenda, that we've got many people asking to go to the extreme limits. And how does that affect what we have in place for vegetation buffers and privacy concerns?
Thank you. And in terms of buffers, what we have are setbacks. And so each zone will have a specific setback for front, back, and the side yards. And those setbacks, again, set well before my time and probably again somewhere flat in the 1970s. And it's intended to try to balance, neighbors' rights between each other. And so in zones that are the same, like residential, the buffers will actually be quite low. So in this case, in an R1 zone, for example, I believe the side setbacks so the buffers on the side are 5 feet, and a neighbor could elect to develop a fence or build a fence or plant trees, but there's no significant requirements. You tend to see more of those type of buffers between different area uses. So on a commercial, adjacent to a residential use, it's usually the responsibility of the more intense use to provide sort of buffer. So in terms of the multifamily dwelling behind, the intent would generally be, and there isn't one, we don't actually have that in our bylaw, but as a multifamily more intense use, it would be shielding it would be shielding itself from the single family dwelling. There's a fairly steep topography there, and I think that topography actually serves as a natural buffer. But in terms of, again, vegetation between residential, that we rely on the setbacks.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. And go ahead, Councillor Anderson. We're talking about height, this 3rd story too, so just want to get back on track there.
My question is about, you mentioned that neighboring properties have 3 stories. So I'm assuming that other variance permits have been put in place already along Pfeiffer. I know of at least 2 houses that have 3 stories in them and suites on the bottom. So I don't see this as being a lot different. Anyways, can you comment on the other houses that have 3 stories?
Yes. I can't give you really detailed background, but I can give you kind of an overview. And so our zoning bylaw has evolved over the years, and there are times in the past where our zoning bylaw hasn't been enacted to the letter of the bylaw all the time, and also issues at a time of issuance of permits and stuff like that. So there may be some houses out there that are occupying basements that weren't originally intended to operate as dwellings. And so I've seen myself basements that over 15 years and well before my time, have migrated into the basements into a suite. And again, it's not uncommon that area. We also have properties, such as the one across the street that we would recently vary to permit something very similar, to allow for that understanding that it would provide more space for a secondary suite. So without getting into specifics of each property, I think there's probably a little bit of sloppiness on behalf of the district in the past. I think there is some idea that sometimes when the district leaves a property, things happen that we're not made aware of until we're made aware of. And then there's this time in front of us where someone said, I'd like to do what the form of the neighborhood is, and I'd like to go through the process to allow that to happen. And again, from a staff point of view, that's what variances are for, and it's particularly in an area of topography like this.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Councillor Steer, and
yeah, I see no further questions. I can move the recommendation if there were no further. That council approved development variance permit number 07-21 attached as Appendix 1 to Very District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770/1997 for lot 21, District Block 115, Clackwood District Plan VIP 59630 as follows. Vary Part 8.6 of the District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770/1997 to increase the maximum permitted stories for principal dwelling in an R1 zone from 2 to 3 as shown on the proposed design attached as an Exhibit A to DBP 07-21. Woo!
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Chalmers. She beat you there, Councillor Anderson. But any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion is carried. Moving on to 9.4 development variance permit, and this is for 646 Parley Place. Mr. Rogers, over to you.
Great, thank you. For my second presentation, I'll be presenting a variance permit for 646 Parley Place. A little bit of a overview. We're looking at a property that is on the corner of Abraham and Parley Place. The applicant is looking to build a house with a suite and would like to have 2 separate accesses to the property to separate the 2 residences. In red here, you can see the proposed width of the driveway, both on the bottom and then to the left of your screen along Abraham Drive. This is a half-an-acre lot zoned RA1, and it permits either a house and a cottage or a house and a suite. The OCP proposed land use is Peninsula, which is a suburban future land use, and there is no development permit area that affects this property. Again, we have a vacant clear lot in the established subdivision. It's a corner lot. The current driveway access exceeds the authorized combined width of 2 driveways of 20 feet per the subdivision development bylaw. And I'll just break that down very briefly. In our bylaw, basically we allow up to 20 feet of driveway. You can have 2 driveways, and each of those could be whatever size you want. So you could have 8 and 12 or 10 and 10 or 7 and 13. But at this point, the maximum width for the entire property is 20 feet. I think I won't go over the statutory authority and policy, but we do have the statutory authority to vary our subdivision and development control bylaw. The applicant wishes to vary that bylaw to permit an increasing the width of the driveways to 18 feet for each driveway rather than the 10 feet that would be permitted under the bylaw unvaried. So as I said, the 6 meters is roughly 20 feet. The maximum number of driveways per lot is 2. The total width shouldn't exceed 6 meters, as I explained earlier. And there's just some other items in the bylaw that have to be met as well. And we understand that those driveways meet these conditions. The building is a single level family dwelling with a suite designed to accommodate aging family members. The increased driveway, and this is from the applicant, would support increased off-street parking for residents and tenants, enhanced visibility, and improved accessibility. We referred this DVP out internally. We have received some information back from Infrastructure and Public Works about the driveways and their current conditions. The Public Works, Engineering Public Works Department, in discussion with those staff members, we've started to identify a potential reconsideration of our existing driveway standard, as we're seeing a fair amount of variances for driveways lately. The proposed driveway configuration for this type of property, so like the corner lot and the size of the property, is appropriate. There is a concern about remediation of the original unauthorized driveway access prior to further approvals, and I can confirm now today with council that the applicant has remediated the current or the driveways that were put in without permits, and Public Works confirmed that for me this morning. We undertook our public notification and consultation process. The notices were mailed and hand delivered to owners and tenants within 60-meter radius. The DVP was made available through the planning department. We didn't receive any feedback about this application, so there's no opposition nor support received. Staff are recommending approval of this variance to permit the two driveways to 11 meters wide, as shown on the proposed design attached as Exhibit A to DVP 821. If council has any questions, I'd be happy to take those now.
I'll let you, there we go. So quick, brief questions only, avoid comments. We're just going to go straight into the recommendation. Otherwise, any questions? Seeing none. Would somebody like to move the recommendation? Go ahead, Councillor Challenger.
Sure, I can move that. So I'll move that the recommendation that council approve development variance permit number 08-21 attached as Appendix 1 to vary District of Tofino subdivision and development control bylaw number 1201 2014 for lot 12 district lot 127 Tla-o-qui-aht district plan VIP 62054 as follows. Vary part 11 standards for works and services schedule F drawing R3 SD of the District of Tofino subdivision and development control bylaw number 1201 2014 to increase the total permitted width of two driveways from 6 meters 19.7 feet to 11 meters 36 feet as shown on the proposed design attached as Exhibit A to DVP 0821.
Seconded by Councillor McMaster. Any comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Excellent, motion is carried, thank you. We'll move right along to 9.5. Zoning amendment bylaw again for 1101 Pacific Rim Highway.
Thank you, Mayor Law. For my third presentation, I will be presenting on 1101 Pacific Rim Highway for first and second reading of a zoning bylaw amendment. Apologies if I'm talking quickly. I'm just trying to be aware of our time and move as fast as I can. So a little bit of background in this report. It's been a while since council has seen it. We received the application in the spring of 2018. Permission to proceed was granted in the summer of 2018. And first reading occurred just before Christmas in 2019. Following that first reading, staff and the applicant worked together to work out the details of the zone, including referrals internally and externally, and then finally following up with an OCP review because we adopted an OCP this March. The original proposal for this application was to address some land use inconsistencies on the lot. So this lot consists of, it's a C5 zone and has a grandfathered campground with it. So there used to be a campground there probably predating the C5 zoning. And so the applicant was intending to try to develop a zone that accommodated both those uses in a way that reflects the current use of it, rather than having this sort of awkward distinction between the C5 and the campground areas. The applicant also wished to, at the time, to adjust the boundary of the existing zone, the C5 zone, with the 2012 future land use line, which is in the OCP. The adoption of the 2021 OCP has negated that intent. But as I'll get to it further in the application, in the presentation, staff still support that boundary alignment. And finally, the applicant wished to add a number of accessory uses related to resort use to the zone. So this is a commercial accommodation zoning amendment. It is an area located outside of our sort of stated growth area in the 2021 OCP. But the applicant's proposal actually can be considered a downzoning. So the current uses on the property would allow the campground as it exists today, plus approximately 200 units of commercial accommodation. The applicant is proposing to reduce that significantly to about 100 units. So the reason that we can continue to move forward as a municipality about this is not new commercial accommodation. It's an amending and adjusting a zone that already exists, a use that is already there. There will be a minimal expansion of the existing resort, I believe, to the tune of 6 extra units, but again, much less than the current C5 zone would permit. In a lot of ways, it would be the poster child for downzoning the C5 zone areas, in that it sets the density and the intensity of use where it is today, rather than allowing significantly more development over the years to come. The original proposal, as I mentioned earlier, talked about a boundary adjustment. The 2021 OCP made that part of the proposal moot, but through the work with the applicant and other consultants, we understand there's a significant archaeological site along the beach front underneath the existing campsites, as well as the sensitive riparian area, as the property is bisected by Mackenzie Creek over a large portion of the property, actually. And so the extra space for that original boundary adjustment is intended to be used to relocate campsites from sensitive areas into other areas. So the considerations, again, we've talked about some of these already, but archaeology was a major one for us, the riparian area as well. Servicing always for zoning, the applicant provided us with a servicing brief that was reviewed by our in the Engineering and Public Works Department, and there are no expected impacts as there is very little additional use happening on that property. We discussed Mackenzie Beach Road at length. At this point, due to the nature of the zone and the opportunity to have this discussion further down the road, staff are not recommending any adjustments to the Mackenzie Beach or any further conversations in this development process about Mackenzie Beach Road, but understanding that this is something that we may want to discuss again at a future zoning, a future subdivision, or a future building permit. One of the key aspects to this project that I think is very exciting is the opportunity for the district to gain access to Mackenzie Beach from Mackenzie Road. So currently the road dead ends into this property, and we have no access, to the beach. The applicant is interested in providing that access for the district, which I think would meet a lot of our goals in our OCP, and make a lot of people happy regarding this, because we've had a lot of conversations about this over the years. And finally, a lot of the zoning considerations can be wrapped up into a development agreement, and the development agreement is highlighted in the report. And if the application moves forward to to public hearing and third reading, staff will get into details of that agreement with the applicant. So zoning, we talk about use and density. In terms of use, there's one principal use on this property. It's a tourist accommodation. We further constrain what exactly that is for this property under conditions of use in the zone. And then in the secondary uses, there's a fairly long laundry list of permitted uses that are related to running a resort and having events there related to having accommodation, with a maximum of 250 people being permitted there at any one time. And again, I think that's actually probably understated, but is an important number to ensure that things we're not overwhelmed by additional people in that area. So in terms of the actual density, we're looking at 50 tent camping sites, 10 recreational vehicle sites, 20 cabins, and then 12 legacy cabins. The next steps for the application, should it move forward, will be a public information session and signage on the property, alerting passersby of the zoning application, followed by a public hearing, and then staff, the applicant, working on a development agreement to finalize that and bring that forward to council at third reading. That is it. I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Okay, this is questions and noting the time. Do we have any questions from council? Councillor Steer.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Law. Yeah, Aaron, I just, prior to final reading it in the report, it talks about some of the agreements that will be necessary as survey and geolocated zoning, agreements for public beach access, the removal of the beach campsites, and the remediation of Mackenzie Creek. And I'm just curious, with these agreements, having these is one thing, and of course, how they're enforced and all that. I'm curious if, for the applicant to proceed with the intended development, first, do those agreements have to be completed before that, before their part of the development would be able to proceed? You know, like we can agree to all this and they can have those agreements in place. Obviously, my concern would be that they would move forward with the development before meeting those obligations that we have placed forward.
Thank you for the question. The intent would be that we finalize the development agreements through third reading, wait until they were put on title prior to final reading, and once they're on title and we have the authority to enforce those, then we would go through with final reading. So to your short answer to your question, yes, we could we would enforce that following final reading. So they couldn't develop unless they developed in accordance with the development agreement itself.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Rogers? Councillor Thick.
Yeah, thank you. As I understand it, the two main issues before us today are use and density. And in regards to the density question, I don't have a huge problem with what I see coming forward. In fact, I think it's rather good. What I do have a problem with right now is the uses as given in the report. And I would like to know exactly from the planning department, just I want those further delineated. I think that there's been a lot of there's been a lot of complaints that I've heard about the live music and the length of time of loud music and how far the live music has carried into the night. So when we say things like live music, I need a much clearer delineation of that before I'd be willing to support it. And I think that, the other question that I have in my mind is when I see that archaeological site there and I see camping there, I think it would be imperative to move those campsites off that site as soon as possible, for all the obvious reasons that you gave in the report. And I'm actually quite surprised that we don't have further information from the archaeological branch about what uses are permitted on a site such as this. So noting that this is Tinwis Beach, that this is a very, very busy beach, I think those two things that I mentioned, the uses and just how does what we're going to, if we do endorse this, how does that affect others' enjoyment of the beach? And in particular, I'm thinking about the campsites adjacent. There's houses on that road and the houses that are very short distance away, because people are being impacted now with that, with the noise and the creation of a small social hub in that area. So I'd like to see that given in a further report. Thank you.
So just to clarify, Councillor Thick, your questions were about loud music, development of the campsite due or non-development of the campsite due to archaeological sites and impacts on the community. Mr. Rogers, can you comment on any of those points as suitable?
Maybe I'll go from the bottom up. So one of the aspects of the development agreement will be the removal of the remediation of the area where the campsites are, and it's my understanding that it'll be just remediated back to a natural beach scape, and that there will be no uses on it. Obviously, that work would have to be done under the watchful eye of both an archaeologist and a biologist, but it's my understanding that the applicant's intended to remove all uses from that specific area. The applicant has asked to do that over a number of years, so we're negotiating how long that would take. We're talking about 3 to 5 years. It may be quite a little bit faster depending on what the applicant can do in terms of their economics. And then the loud music, I don't know exactly what to do about that. If it's something that is usually addressed through our noise bylaw and our business licensing, and so I would again try to stick to just use, so that music loud, and constrain it elsewhere. We have constrained this in other times through development covenants. We've also constrained it in once or twice through zoning bylaw. I would prefer to deal with it through business licensing or the noise bylaw. And if we want the application to move forward, if that's not acceptable, we want the application to move forward, then I would recommend potentially including that as one of our terms in our development agreement.
Any other further, Councillor Thick, do you have another question?
No, just I would.
Only for questions, no comments, right?
Yeah, I just think
we're questioning.
I think it'd be important to clarify that at the outset rather than put more onus on our staff to try and deal with it from the other end. I just think it's incumbent upon us to look at what is being requested and to make those uses very clear and understandable to the proponent.
Okay, questions for Mr. Rogers? I just want to note that if we have comments to the motion, we can put the motion, we can move the motion, and then there's a point for comments, and we can debate whether we're for it or against it, and go from there. So that's just little Robert's Rules of Order there. So if there's no more questions for Mr. Rogers, be somebody happy to move the motion. Councillor Chalmers, go ahead.
I'll move the first reading of District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1273 2019 on December 10 2019 be rescinded, and that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1273 2019 attaches appendix 1 to the report titled zoning amendment bylaw number 1273 2019 1101 Pacific Rim Highway, first and second reading dated September 28th 2021 be read a first and second time, and that staff be directed to schedule a public hearing for District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1273 2019.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Now, do we have any comments on this? Would you guys like to comment further on this motion before I call the question? Seeing no comments, all in favor? And any opposed? Seeing none opposed, motion is carried. Okay. Moving on to 9.6, zoning amendment bylaw number 1243, and this is for Industrial Way.
Thank you, Mayor Law. This is one of the reports I do not have a presentation for. This is final reading for a long-running rezone application at Industrial Way, and the district was waiting for the applicant to complete 3 items. Those items being an environmental impact agreement. So we've received that, and it's now on title as a covenant. So prior to a building permit being issued, the applicant will have to do environmental reporting and as well as some site planning with the district. There was a community amenity contribution that the applicant generally gave to the District of Tofino in the amount of $22,500, and the 3 lots were consolidated into 1 lot. So upon completion of this zoning application, the permissions will be to develop 3 industrial type buildings with 3 units of housing as well.
Tried to hit mute and I hit something else and thought I'd exited out here. Okay, excellent. Thank you. And are there any questions for Mr. Rogers before we move the motion? Okay, seeing none. Would somebody like to read the recommendation? Councillor Thick.
That the District of Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1243, 2018 be adopted.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. And do we have any comments on this? Debate, comments? Seeing none. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion is carried. Excellent. Zoning amendment bylaw number 1302. This is Olson Road.
Thank you, Mayor Law. I've lost count of which presentation this is. This is in relation to the delegation that we heard earlier in the meeting. Again, this is for the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust at 301 Olson Road for second reading. This application has moved quite quickly. We received it in the summer of 2020. Permission to proceed was granted in the fall of the same year, and first reading on December 8th of 2020. Following first reading, staff worked with the applicant to work out the details and the referrals from the application, and as well had to undertake a 2021 OCP review to ensure that the proposed application is aligned with the guidelines of the OCP. I think we're all familiar with this at this point, so I'll move quite quickly. It's an institutional building intended for occupation by the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust. There'll be 2 accessory residential units under our housing agreements, and there'll be community space for educational programming and events. In terms of zoning considerations, we wanted to ensure that it aligns with the OCP, which staff, in the opinion of staff, it does. We wanted to ensure that it aligns with the crab dock and waterfront area. And again, on balance, staff believes that that is aligned. There were no expected impacts from servicing other than a requirement for a sprinkler system for fire flows. And so that item will be included in a future development agreement if we make a 2/3 reading. Drainage is also taken into consideration, understanding that the district is soon to undertake work along Olson Road and improve that. And we wanted to make sure that the applicant's engineers were talking to the district engineers early, and staff have no concerns over drainage. The affordable housing agreement, as mentioned by Bob Prevost, is drafted and will be brought forward to council at third reading if the application moves forward. There were some considerations about fit with Olson Road, so that, it's a fairly large building in comparison to some of the adjacent properties, and wanted to understand the massing of that and to try to address or hear any neighborhood concerns. We also looked at multi-use improvements that the district's planning along that area, and had the applicant's architects connect with the district's consultants in terms of ensuring that the frontage design along Campbell Street would match up with the future district improvements. And finally, traffic and parking have been brought up both by the neighborhood and by the applicant. The applicant provided us with a TIA, a traffic impact assessment, and to look seriously at the turning ins and the turning outs and the sight lines along that area. And some of those considerations or all those considerations are addressed in the report. And at this point, staff have no issues with those. Use and density, always with zoning. So it's an assembly use, a place where people can gather. It'll have professional offices. You can have a museum, and it will have the accessory residential use. A development agreement that would be finalized at third reading would include design and massing. So not to be too prescriptive, but there would be some requirements to meet the design as is being proposed to us today, as well as the massing, to ensure that in the future that did not diverge much from what has been presented to date. The driveway location will also need to be locked down through the development agreement to ensure maximum safety of the road and the sightlines and the parking in the area. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there will be requirement for a sprinkler system as per the servicing brief that we received. And then again, the integration of the site with the public realm, so specifically Campbell Street and Olsen Road. So if the application moves forward, we'll have a public information session. There'll be signage located on the property alerting passerbys to the fact that this application is under review, followed by a public hearing. And then similarly to the Mackenzie Beach application, we'll be looking at development agreements and third reading. I would be happy to take any questions at this time.
Okay, I'm going to open up. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I'm going to open up to council for questions right now. Councillor McMaster.
It seems to me from the letters I've been getting as if the whole neighbourhood still doesn't want this to go ahead. Have we ever had anything in Tofino where the neighbourhood seems to object and we still push through the development?
I think we see that all the time. I think that's part of what happens in development is that we have, we have uses that come in or variances that come up, and it's different than what people, what is happening today. And I think it's part of development in a small community or in any community. So I can't speak for council as a whole. I can say that I've seen opposition for stuff, and I've seen us move forward things as well.
But this seems like the whole street as opposed to just a few people. That's what I'm asking. I mean, I know there's always pros and cons from people, but this seems like the whole street isn't in favor of this.
Yeah, it seems like there's a significant opposition to it in the neighborhood.
Any further questions for Mr. Rogers? I actually have a question about the. I know that the design and massing has been at issue in every meeting, and I understand that what we are presented with today is there has been no change to this design since permission to proceed. Has there been any changes since the first?
Yeah, I believe after first reading or prior to first reading, the applicant modified the design in related to feedback from the community. So the design was specifically as it's adjusted, the massing was reduced, and again, I think in terms of like where offices looked and where the deck, they were adjusted. So there has been a design change related to early neighborhood conversations.
That was, I believe that was prior to permission to proceed. Those design changes came in. I think I looked back there, but so since permission to proceed, I was asking, you think those design changes came in after permission to proceed?
I think it's actually in the report. If you just give me 1 second here, I'll pull it up. So there was updated in sometime in it was updated pre first reading. So between permission to proceed and first reading, it was updated.
Okay. And one other comment that I've actually received was the timing of the traffic assessment. Was there are you aware of the timing of the traffic assessment and whether or not it was undertaken in a busy time or a lockdown time? And in your opinion, would that change the nature of the traffic assessment much?
So I understand it was taken down during the last 2 years, which would have been placed squarely in the pandemic. And I believe it was taking place during a slower part of the year. I think it was the fall of the year. This is something that we encounter on every application. Not everything is lined up with summer all the time. And so there is generally the people that do these reports are professionals, and they'll add a factor to that, and they'll use data from other reports that have factored that in or have been done on that certain time, or they'll use data from the province and MODI. I know that when we reviewed that through engineering engineering and public works, that we didn't raise any concerns about the methodology behind that that count. These things are not always going to happen on July 1st.
Councillor Anderson.
There was some comment in one of the letters about the change in the OCP, and some of the language in the OCP changed around the Crab Dock neighborhood. I believe the older OCP sort of viewed it as a special development area where the neighborhood was expected to sort of be well informed and brought into the development process or something like that. I'm just wondering from that old OCP, how much of those kind of considerations should be brought into viewing it now, viewing this application?
Thanks for the question. The OCP has changed, and so this application is being reviewed under the new OCP. That being said, the applicant did follow directions of the previous OCP to get to first reading, and so had met with the neighborhood on a number of occasions. I will say that in my time here, this is probably one of the most intensive public consultations and actions I've seen to work with neighbors. I understand that they have not. The two visions are not aligned between the 6 or 7 houses that are there and CBT, but I will give the CBT credit for attempting to work as they can, understanding they have a goal as well. And I think if I can just cast my mind back to previous meetings when this was first presented, part of the reason this is larger is that the district was intending to hopefully to retain 2 units of housing. So, previously it is currently zoned R2 duplex, and so inclusion of those buildings drives massing as well. And at some point, the CBT, has their business needs and that need to be met. And so I think that is part of one of the issues about the massing of it as it is currently, or how we've got to where we are today.
Just a follow-up question. If the lot was developed as a duplex to its full potential, what could it look like with the setbacks and height restrictions in place now? Is it potentially a building just as large as this one with as much massing and maybe even less design considerations?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Anderson. It's a significant increase in size and massing, both in lot coverage and floor area ratio. And so the current R2 zone permits 34 feet of buildings. The setbacks are the same as we looked at the R1 zone earlier. It's 25 feet for the front, 30 for the back, and 5 and 12 feet on the interior lot lines. The big changes would be lot coverage. So in the R2 zone, you're allowed 30%, and the proposed CBT zone, I understand, is closer to 60, and the floor area ratio is also is tripled from 0.6 to 1.8. So it is a significant difference from the current R2 zone. You could still build a pretty big duplex there, but not nearly as large as what's being proposed.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Rogers? Now, if council would like to debate this and further, we can either do it before we read the motion or after the motion is second, and then we have a time for comments and we can debate the motion there. Does council have a preference? Councillor Thick?
Yeah, I would like to read the motion and then have the discussion as we usually do after the reading of the recommendation.
Okay, we can do that, and then we can have comments during the comment time. Actually, I bring that up because in the past couple of years we've been doing a lot of debate before the motion has actually been read, which works well sometimes, but just trying to really get it back onto Robert's Rules of Orders, at least somewhat. So, with no further ado, would somebody like to read the motion?
Yeah, I could read the motion that zoning amendment bylaw number 1302/2020 be read a second time, and that the manager of community sustainability be authorized to schedule a public hearing for the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1302/2020.
Seconded by Councillor Chalmers. And now I'm going to open it up for comments. People like to comment this and debate. Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Law. Yeah, in terms of the commenting on this, I did want to point out that I will say up front that I'm comfortable moving it to the public hearing aspect, because I think what we're being tasked to do is look at the use and density. And my understanding from many of the neighbors, the major concerns that had come up were certainly around traffic, around massing, and for certain of the properties, the privacy that would be afflicted by this particular building. And I think at the public hearing phase, as we'll be able to hear more articulation of that, because things have changed slightly and around the use and density. And I really, I think the use of it, I don't think many in the neighborhood, in my conversations with many, are not opposed to the actual use of the building. I think many of them actually support the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust and the idea of bringing this type of opportunity to our community and our region was supportive. But there were some serious concerns around, as we pointed out, around traffic massing and privacy. So I would like to see it go to that public hearing to be able to hear once again from the public and probably specifically those neighbors in terms of the concerns, that if they are still there, to reiterate those, to make it clear to council and to the Biosphere Trust around those concerns, and that we would have the ability to hear that in a more fulsome way. So I would be supportive of moving this to that public hearing phase. And I'd like to, if there are other comments from council, I would appreciate that. Thank
you. Councillor Chalmers.
I agree with everything that Councillor Steer said. I'd like to see it go to the public hearing for similar reasons.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that. Anyone else? Yeah. I do concur with you, Councillor Steer and Councillor Chalmers, and I have a slightly different recollection, and I'm just going to bring it up here. I believe I was on council for the permission to proceed and for first reading, and I remember distinctly permission to proceed that the present, now we can go back and correct me if I'm wrong later, but the present design was presented at the permission to proceed. And at that time, council had a problem with the mass and density, and that the design was then presented again at first reading with an explanation that the design changes had happened prior to proceeding, permission to proceed, and then council did consider that those changes happened. And so in my mind, council has had a problem with mass and density all along, and I would like this to go to public hearing, and I would like council to consider, if there's a significant public request for changes, that the public hearing not be sort of rubber stamping or just trying to get through, fulfilling the legislation, but actually a public hearing with some meat. That's my comment. Any other comments from council? Councillor Chalmers?
Thank you, Mayor Law. For my recollection for council, it was less about massing and more about line of sight with neighboring properties. And I do feel that they have addressed that since in let no windows now on that side and really focusing on the Campbell Street direction. So just to clarify that maybe there were a few differing opinions there with that.
Very good. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah, and possibly I'm sure too that some of those other issues like looking out the windows can be addressed at another time. Any other comments from council? Before I call the question, Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, just I concur with previous councillors that that I think it should go to public hearing. And I think council should address any further concerns that are brought forward there. It's possible to require some buffering or other things. I don't think it's such a bad fit for the neighborhood as people are making it out to be. But I'm going to listen and see what happens at public hearing. Thanks.
Councillor McMaster?
Yeah, I'm happy for it to go to public hearing. I'm just concerned we're just going to hear that 7 residences on the street have the same concerns, and we're faced with the same dilemma as we are now.
Okay, well, I will, without further ado, I'll call the question. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to...
Sorry, Mayor Law, can we take a 2-minute break?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Without, I think we can do a consent to take a 2-minute break. See you in 2 minutes. Okay, before I return from recess, have we got everybody here? I believe so. All right, carrying on, if everybody's present. We do have quite an agenda ahead of us, so I'm just going to encourage councillors and staff to keep things as brief as possible and put the effort in where we need it. We have 9.8 temporary use permit for 150 and 170 Grice Road, and this is the Wild Pod Resort renewal.
Have you guys seen my screen? I've tried to share twice, but it's...
You did pop up and then it disappeared again.
Okay, how about now?
It is on and staying on.
Thank you. I don't actually have eyes on it. Let me just see if I can fix this.
Remind everybody to mute if they're not presenting.
This is awkward. There we go. Got it. Okay, for our second last presentation of the evening, a temporary use permit extension for the Wild Pods at 150 plus 170 Grice Road. The property in question is located on Grice Road by West Street on the ocean. The overview of the site as it currently exists is the Wild Pods. There's 6 Wild Pods and an office and service shed on the property. Again, the current use is the TUP. The zoning is actually a comprehensive zone that permits up to 25 resort condominiums. It's in the village proposed land use and is in the development permit area steep slopes, which it is exempt for as we're not dealing with a subdivision. The background, there was an original 3D TUP that expires in a couple of days. As far as staff understands, their business and the property is operated in accordance with the existing TUP conditions. We've had no complaints and no issues with the applicant in terms of business licensing or bylaw. There are, again, as I said, 6 geodesic domes, 1 office building. There's an off-site staff housing, a unit of staff housing that's provided. The guests have access to washroom and shower facilities, and we understand that there is adequate water, sewer drainage, and fire protection in place. A statutory authority, temporary use permits are permitted under the Local Government Act. They can be issued for a maximum of 3 years, renewed once in their existing form. It's intended to be temporary, not a long-term land use solution. The current use aligns with the zoning for the property, in the sense that it's commercial accommodation. The proposal is to renew the TUP for 3 years in accordance with current conditions, including the housing, and maintaining the existing vegetation and maintaining the safety provisions in the TUP. This may be a short-term solution to a potential rezoning, and I understand the applicant and our planning team has been in touch with the applicants about what that might look like. The proposal provides an economic opportunity for local residents. There is provisions for nuisance mitigation within the TUP, and this, again, we've had no history of any bylaw intervention. In terms of garbage and recycling, the site is clean, well maintained, with very minimal opportunities for wildlife encounters. Again, as I mentioned earlier, their permanent use is for a resort condo up to 25 units. And again, the applicant is aware that a zoning amendment is required at some point if they wish to continue this use past 2024. We notified the public per regulations, including an ad in the Westerly. The temporary use permit was made available through the planning department. We received no opposition nor support for the application. Staff's recommendation is that we issue the temporary use permit for the use that is currently occurring on the site. I would have to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much. Do we have any questions before we move the recommendation? Seeing none, I will move that the staff be authorized to approve the temporary use permit, TUP, attached as Appendix 1 to the staff report, temporary use permit, Wayne Schofield, 150 plus 170 Grice Road, dated September 28, 2021. Seconded by Councillor Challenger. Any further comments? All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving right on to 9.9, significant tree protection amendment.
Thank you, Mayor Law. This will there's no presentation for this report. This is amendments being brought back to council per council's request to address the fines for cutting down a significant tree in a significant tree bylaw. Staff are recommending including a $10,000 fine under the Offence Act in that bylaw, and so then staff would have 3 enforcement tools available: the bylaw notice at $500, the MTI at $1,000, and then the Offence Act at $10,000.
Excellent. I thank you very much. Any questions before I move the recommendation? Seeing none, I will move that the District of Tofino Significant Tree Amendment Bylaw number 856.02 2021 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time. I'm seconded by Councillor McMaster. I have a comment. Great work. Great work. Great way to respond to council's request, and a great way to diversify options for enforcement. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Without further ado, call a question. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carried. And we have a parental leave notice to council. There's a verbal report from corporate services. Ms. Best.
Thank you, Mayor Law. I won't turn my camera on, but I will make this very brief. I would just like to notify council and the public that Councillor Challenger has submitted her application for leave, for parental leave, and it has obviously been approved because council has adopted our parental leave policy at our last council meeting. So Councillor Challenger will be attending to her leave from October 1st, 2021 to March 31st, 2022 for 6 months. And we'd like to congratulate her on that endeavor. And in her leave application, she did provide us that she does not need any acting mayor duties needing coverage, and her committee appointments is the Each Advisory Committee, which she's an alternate on, and the Tofino Housing Corporation, which we will work with separately with the THC board for coverage needed there. So thank you, Councillor Challenger, and we wish you the best of luck with your new addition to your family.
Excellent. And this is the first councillor ever to be on District of Tofino council parental leave. So congratulations.
Thank you.
9/11 Beach Bay Parking. And we have a program update from Mr. Fraser Work.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Fraser Work. I'm the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works here at the district. And tonight I'd like to take you through a report which is before council for consideration and information, which is an update about 6 weeks into our beach pay parking program, with some information about overall performance of parking and some commentary and feedback from the public related to some of the restrictions that were associated with the changes that were made earlier in 2021. I'll share my screen now and move to my PowerPoint presentation. So just bear with me, please, for 1 minute as I transition to the presentation mode, which should be up in front of council now. If I got a nod from the mayor or a thumbs up, that would be perfect, as I only see a few of you on screen. So I'll just go through what is sort of a brief overview of the report that's been published, and then open up, of course, for questions at the end. The background here is listed as per some of the most recent discussions through 2021 that led to both relationships with contracted service providers for the pay parking systems, as well as the resultant bylaw changes in public engagement, and outline some of those sessions that took place and the meetings that supported those changes through the summer. And of course, just a note about the ongoing improvements to the physical parking system, whether that's pay or unpaid. The The issues that are covered in the report talk a little bit about those areas that we're seeing opportunities for improvements and change, as well as some of the performance attributes of the system. Overall, we're seeing over a 95% compliance ratio, which means over 95 of 100 parkers are playing by the rules and enjoying access to those locations without any issues. And we're seeing a low level, comparatively speaking, by industry standards of issues and warnings or tickets on our system, which is great, especially for a new system, which is sometimes harder to navigate or understand for users that have enjoyed accessing these locations before under a different regime. We have seen some feedback from the traveling and visiting public about those areas along Lynn Road and Chesapeake Beach Road where there isn't a pay station, and where users are actually accessing the apps for the first time. In some cases would prefer just to walk up to a pay station and pay the station. They've expressed some needs for some improved signage, which we have now received and will be deploying to those areas that need it. Which are a little bit more physically separated from the physical stations. Of course, each pay station comes with its infrastructure needs and associated costs. And I think as we mature, we'll continue to monitor and learn whether or not there is a steady state requirement or if that was more of an initial teething pain with respect to the program and its layout. We did have some challenges where busy Maltby Road and Braden Road at Cox Bay did have some issues with signal strength nearest to the pay stations or the signs, where people were either trying to do digital payments for credit card applications, which were maybe timing out. And so we've worked with TELUS and are in the process, or it might be done now. I got a report that it's likely finished, but we're just waiting for confirmation. There's a signal booster that's been installed there to improve the strength of the cellular service in that area, which should result in less interruptions to financial transactions that are in the cloud. We're still on track to install timber pay station shelters, which are referred to as kiosks, which will be similar in design to the ones that are contained in the Pacific Rim National Park Reserve, which have a large chunky timber sort of structured uprights with a slanted roof, which would provide shelter and cover for those using the shelters in the inclement weather, as well as for the shelters themselves to be out of the environment a little bit more than they would be when as compared to today. We have continued to amend some of our parking to our signage to make sure that travelers know that only vehicles of a certain type and size can access various parking stalls. And we still see some compliance issues in and around this, where very long vehicles might try to park in a very small spot, and that risks either inconveniencing or potentially safety issues for the other parkers. So we continue to wrestle with some of that, and some of it's size and some of it's a compliance, education, or enforcement issue. We have seen continued use of trailers parking along roadways, and we do not have a separate price point for a vehicle that might be 40 feet in length because it has a separate trailer system. So something to consider for the future. We continue to see along Lynn Road and Chesapeake Beach Road visitors to different residential addresses that park on the boulevard that actually take the road parking out of service, or in some cases cross a pedestrian sidewalk in order to access those, which we would like to avoid where possible to improve safety and also improve the use of the on-street parking system. We've seen poor habits like parking facing the wrong way, which is a Motor Vehicle Act infraction, or people parking out in the right of way, people parking over two different spots, and all that kind of normal stuff that you'd expect in any parking system, which is a little bit harder to control when you don't have painted lines on asphalt where we have gravel systems. So it's a little bit harder to enforce in some respects where we don't have very, very clear delineation, but we'll continue to find creative and interesting ways to help move that forward in the right way. Some of it is maybe inattention, and some of it might be deliberate, but it's really an enforcement issue that's either handled by a warning or a ticket at this stage of the game. And those numbers, like I said earlier, are low in overall volume. Like I mentioned, we have some improved signage, which will continue to be installed and upgraded at different locations, which also includes some more positive messaging as people exit the parking system that says, "Thank you for keeping our beaches clean," and aligning with our "Show Your Love for the West Coast," and some of that messaging that's already out there in the public realm, which helps kind of increase that positive messaging rather than the regulatory messaging that can be associated with parking, and also tailor some of that messaging to more of our Tofino brand when it comes to a parking system that's a bit different than you'd see in an urban center, as we would hope. We continue to struggle a little bit with highway safety and parking overflow at the locations near the Surf Grove and Malpe. Most extreme examples of that were probably experienced this past weekend during the busy surf competition, where the first time in my tenure here at the district, I've seen parking on both sides of the highway. And we continue to work with MOTI to hopefully find and identify some long-term solutions where we continue to improve the safety and the sight lines and the parking there. When the rights of way are constrained by additional parked vehicles along the shoulder, it does tend to slow traffic down, which in many cases is a good thing. But in some cases, it can tip in the wrong direction, where sight lines and different obstructions prevent safe movements between different roadways. And we all worry, of course, that could have severe impact. So we'll continue to work with the highway as it's their right of way and understand what options we may have, like culverting in some of the shoulders to the south towards our lift station, which may be adequate parking, overflow, a more formal kind of designated parking in the future, but still too early to tell until we get their commitments. We do have a bit of a concern on the Howard Drive overflow, which council would recall us discussing as what are we going to do about potential issues to Howard. And in some cases, we have seen some overnight parkers that have moved from Lynn Road to Howard. And we had some improved signage going at the end of Howard just during summertime to deter overnight camping at that location. And in recent days, we've seen very busy North Chesterman beach activities with the increased fall swell, surf swell. And we are continuing to monitor that Howard Drive location, which council may recall staff discussed as a known risk item that we would continue to monitor, but also one that may be best remedied by a residential parking permit system in the future, which would of course have to be administered consistently across the district. My next slide is just a highlight of some of the statistics around where we're at today, which may be of interest to council. So we've administered 1,129 annual free permits for those eligible to receive those as Tofino and neighboring First Nations addresses. We have administered 80 discounted permits through the ACRD, which have all been done through the online Robbins Tofino parking registration system. About a quarter of all of these require additional correspondence between the Robbins admin staff and the applicant, which is a number we would like to see obviously come down as this delays the time in which those applicants may receive their permit that they've applied for, or it may end up just requiring additional staff resources to administer. So we're keeping an eye on that metric in hopes to determine a healthier sort of norm, which I would expect to be sort of around the 10% notionally at this stage of the game, with some target that we might want to try to reach. The complaints listed here are just some of the theme ones, and I have to minimize my screen here because my window of people's faces is kind of over my text. So excuse me for one sec. We obviously had several complaints from registrants expressing concerns with having to pay for any annual permit, even at a discounted rate. We have heard complaints about people being concerned about their personal information being supplied during the registration process, which we provided additional commentary and supporting information to help alleviate any concerns. We have heard about some dissatisfaction about businesses not being eligible to include their vehicles, and for us having to explain a little bit more about that we're not allowed to aid and abet a business. We've had discussions about the beach pay parking not being transferable to the system that's included at the municipal hall, and that's something that we would consider in the architecture of our future downtown parking, of course, but right now it is separate. And we've seen some confusion about the digital platform for registration, and we included some stopgap solutions to allow in-person registration for those that were having trouble with the online portal, which we saw a few numbers uptake over the course of the last 6 weeks or 8 weeks. As far as district issued permits for overnight parking, we've issued 20, which has been mostly to registration applications from Frank Island residents for their guests that were staying overnight during the summer, and 4 steady state monthly parking permits for Frank Island property owners or tenants. We've seen bylaws, district staff have issued 72 different infractions since the opening, and that's a few days old now since publishing, but these are mostly related to non-pay types of infractions and overnight camping or motor vehicle infractions, unsafe parking choices, etc. And bylaw has been in partner with us as we've introduced this system, but have been able to, of course, focus some of their resource efforts elsewhere as we've allowed Robins to regulate the pay parking zones as a full-time gig. Enforcement and dispute, we've issued 132 tickets warnings and 501 infractions or tickets, and half of those have been pay related, and several of the penalties were waived with the condition that the applicant would shift to their online free annual permit if they were eligible. So those were waived, and that was always part of our introduction and sort of our soft opening. No disputes to report at this stage. And pay parking revenues in the first 1 month of the system, the parking system earned $137,000. What's not articulated here in this report is the expenses associated with that, which we'll talk more about in the financial plan, which gives an average day and peak day revenues with lowest day indications there, which help guide a little bit of expectations. And we're now starting to see the changes of the season and the changes of busy weekends, and trying to understand a little bit more about how parking patterns will evolve away from the peak season and into the fall program. It's important to note that a significant push for the introduction of parking in the August timeframe was to not just access these types of revenues, but to learn about the peak season operations of the parking so that we could understand a little bit better how parking patterns will evolve over a full calendar year, and learn really important lessons that we would have otherwise had to wait a year to learn. One of those I've already discussed, which was the cell signal strength and the issues when very, very busy and in high demand. We may not have learned that we needed to up or boost that cell signal at Maltby until later next year. And so we've been able to make those types of corrections on the fly because we were able to open before the end of the summer peak. The largest contributor to the revenues thus far has been Cox Bay Maltby. Has a significant number of stalls, and also obviously a very busy location, a little bit swell dependent, where you see the bigger swell days, a lot of shifting to Lynn Road and Chesapeake Beach Road as forecasted. And also important to note that if you buy a ticket at Maltby, which this number really reflects the purchases at Maltby, you can of course move and float between the different beach pay parking zones. So you might only spend a couple hours, you might spend most of your day at North Chesapeake, which wouldn't be reflected in these numbers. These numbers only reflect the purchase location. So moving into some of the issues in the analysis and away from some of the stats, the next part of the presentation really does focus on overnight parking restrictions and some of the feedback and commentary we've shared with different affected residents and stakeholders in community. What we've learned is that sorry, I'm just moving my screen again. Some residents are impacted and remain impacted by the restrictions, which makes parking overnight from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. unauthorized. And some residents have come forward and expressed their concerns or opposition to that policy change. And in many cases have asked for clarification of why that exists. So in our engagement thus far, we've talked about the policy, which was really intended to reduce the instance of overnight parking and overnight camping along beach locations, which aligns with the current restrictions in beach parking lots or the previous restrictions in beach parking lots, and also to help shift storage of residential vehicles to private property, which overall reduces the wear and tear on infrastructure and takes care of a lot of the risks that we were trying to address through informal parking patterns. The current restrictions are highlighted here, and basically just summarize what the current setup is just for council's review, which is obviously contained in our bylaws. The public engagement, based on some of the feedback we had with residents who had expressed concerns about not having a place to park because the parking along Lynn and Chesterman Beach roads was removed, we called a meeting on the 25th of August and talked to several residents who had expressed their concerns, and I'm summarizing the issues here in a light level of detail. They were all concerned about mainly not having parking on their property and relying on that parking in the public right of way. And in some of them, they wanted to know a little bit more about the why that policy had changed. So there was an overall expression of the issue, which was lack of available residential parking at their locations. The property owner had expressed either that there was a very inconvenient or the higher costs of adding more parking on their property, or those were anecdotally forwarded by the tenant as what their landlord had said. There was an expressed competition between their parking availability as tenants, long-term tenants, and being displaced by the parking needs to service short-term vacation rentals. There was a lot of feedback about the inconvenience and the cost of the overnight permits, whether that was a property owner or a tenant that wanted to have a guest stay overnight and they didn't want to have to go to Municipal Hall and pay for that premium permit. And there was also an expressed issue from the district's perspective that if in many of the cases, the people in question, if they had to park overnight, of course, on the street, that meant in most cases or in all cases that they would also have to park during the day on the street, which would displace available parking, which was a concern, but potentially not a driving concern. So a lot of this discussion in the report does highlight that the instance of camping and overnight camping in vehicles has seen a reduction since this policy came into place. Although this was an informal assessment done mostly by myself, where I leave Lynn Road, and I do cycle the whole length of Lynn Road and Howard, and sometimes would go south on Chesterman Beach Road at about the 6 o'clock mark on my way to work. So not a formal assessment, and that should be highlighted. The new pay parking has highlighted other parking shortfalls that were potentially related to different restrictions or objectives that were highlighted in the zoning bylaw with respect to parking requirements for vacation rentals or B&Bs. So what I'm saying here is that because we started restricting the parking on Lynn Road overnight, we illuminated a whole bunch of areas where there wasn't adequate parking that should have been covered or met by the existing obligations. Overnight enforcement is, of course, a challenge that council is aware of. The hours of 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. May be sparsely enforced, and to add human resources in that time is both costly and potentially comes at a lower enforcement presence at other times. Some tenants are clearly without convenient alternatives for parking on private property, and I would say an unintended consequence of this policy would be that in certain cases, tenants do not have an option and are looking to the district for support in this particular issue. Some users, like I said, some users are disproportionately disadvantaged. The private vehicle storage on public property has been very convenient along Lynn Road and Chesterman Beach Road in the past. And of course, this change removes that amenity and is in stark contrast. So I wouldn't say that the pushback on this part of the policy is a surprise, but I think it's a consideration to note that it's quite new, and it also is quite different from what has been the norm. So that should be a consideration for us moving forward. The current policy of a no overnight parking removes that option, of course, as well as introduces a price and a process that is inconvenient. And I would say, and council might remember us talking about how it should be inconvenient to a point in order to incentivize a change of private parking on private property. But if we were to consider alternative policy options, we should look at these risks that we've been exploring here in this report and exploring with the different tenants and stakeholders in community, and see if we can come up with some options that better balance these risks. We have not yet had broad engagement with the community and the other residents that live in the nearby properties. We really have seen from a small group of people that have raised valid concerns, but I would assess that more engagement is required for us to capture the perspectives of those who have not yet engaged on this issue because they were either happy with how it was behaving or they had comments or had not been able to attend some of the engagement today. So we would explore other options to connect with those important voices. And my last slide is the recommended next steps. So we have a beach pay parking system that is in effect, and we continue to manage and look at opportunities to improve. We are collecting data every single day with our onboard, dashboard and daily updates of intel that comes from the enforcement vehicle, as both revenues as well as other aspects of the parking system. We should continue to engage with the public on this overnight road parking restrictions and potentially look at drawing that to some sort of a conclusion or a recommendation to present to council in a report in the near term. And as well as we are planning on bringing back several pieces of information relevant to parking and pay parking planning that would be part of the financial planning process and would be in front of council in the coming weeks to keep this conversation live about what's the best next steps for us as a district when it comes to pay parking at this location and any other location in town, and as well permits and related parking architecture, so that we gain the most benefits from the whole system and avoid the risks that we want to avoid. So on that note, I'll stop sharing my screen and maximize the tiles so we can have a discussion and I can answer any questions. Thank you for your attention this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Work. Councillor McMaster, questions?
Thanks, Fraser. A good presentation as usual. My only question really is, most complaints I've had are about registration, the difficulty people have had, and this is from, well, I would say people less computer literate, because it's not just old people, it's young people as well. So I'd like to hear a bit more about the in-person registration, because I'm getting tired of doing it for them.
Thanks, Councillor McMaster. Through the mayor, I'm not sure if I got a question out of that or if it was just that you're interested in seeing a bit more of the in-person option so that we could address those concerns that have been raised to you. Is that correct in my interpretation?
Yeah, well, you mentioned in your presentation about in-person registration. So are you saying somebody can go into the office and register there?
That, through the mayor, that is the case right now, where the office staff would be able to take all the particulars that would essentially mirror the process that's online about proof of address, proof of vehicle registration that is allocated to the same name, and then a list of those license plates. That can be done manually in person with office staff. I would note, of course, looking at NILA, that these in-person transactions have a cost with respect to level of effort and human resources that are borne by us rather than Robbins as part of the contracted expenses. And that's just a key consideration, I think, for all of us moving forward when we want to design something that's both fit for purpose, but also as efficient as possible.
Okay, I would tell the various people I know that they can go to the office, because I think we need to help some people out.
Any further questions for Councillor Steer? Oh, sorry, and Councillor Challenger, did you have your hand up before that? Go ahead. We'll go Councillor Steer and then Councillor Challenger.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Law. And thank you, Fraser, once again, great report. I have two questions. One, in terms of the public engagement process, I know that and you've pointed out that it is a fairly small group that had those overnight concern questions that are coming forward. The first part of the question is about how going about that public engagement process. And is that, are you anticipating that to be in a very, very soon to address what I would consider a fairly small group of people?
Thanks, Councillor Steer. And through the mayor, I still have some work to do to liaise more closely with communications staff and corporate services to talk about which tools in our toolkit we want to deploy in what order. But in my thinking thus far, we had some success with the mail out notices that went to affected residents when it came to the big changes, which were, of course, along the introduction of the beach on-street parking zone. And so we may want to repeat that with the hand-delivered notice that says, hey, this is what's happening, and please, we would love to hear from you. So if you'd like to contribute, and we draw them to the right platform. I imagine that the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation is a fit for purpose platform for us to actually sort of reboot, a bit of a discussion that both captures the voices that we know are in play here on where concerns have been raised, but also try to gain some more perspectives and additional people to engage in the conversation, so we have a more wholesome picture of what's going on there on those sections, and that we understand exactly who feels that they've been left behind, and some of the perspectives of people that have other things to offer and other feedback to offer that we haven't heard thus far. So I think my hope is that we can do that quite streamlined and quite quickly. Like I said, I'll talk to communication staff and see if we can develop a plan that gets us some good information in a way that is quite easy to deploy. That's the hope.
Great. And I had a quick follow-up question. You had mentioned in the in your report about what we'd be discussing the cost end of this through the financial process, and I suspect through that process we'll have an idea of, as you were talking about, the longer term picture in terms of those projected revenues over the slower parts of the process, but also more engaged in how those the costs that are associated would be dispersed over that longer period, or that period of time when revenues may be at a lower spot. So I suspect that will be coming, and I look forward to having that information coming forward around costs.
Thanks, Councillor Steer, through the mayor. Yeah, those discussions will be fleshed out during our financial planning meetings coming up, and we're definitely able to share that the Robbins contract has associated costs that have been already briefed to council, and that we all are also revising our projections based on what we've seen thus far, and working with Robbins and some of the professionals in the space to refine and continue to improve our projections as we learn about the system, so that we can intervene as early as possible with any cost savings measures or mitigation. So we'll look forward to those discussions with council during the budget process to make sure that council's questions can be answered and we can dive more deeply into that area.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Challenger.
Thank you. So I would like to comment that I do concur with Councillor McMaster that, and first of all, thank you, Mr. Work, for your presentation. Lots of great stuff moving forward. Good to see the report. But that, yeah, there are many barriers for many people. So it may be helpful to have some communication go out so that it's made more available to community members, that they are able to do that in person. And secondly, with the public engagement, as I've attended a few of those over the last several months, I do sympathize with some of those concerns of community members about overnight parking, and not only overnight parking, but the 11 o'clock cutoff. And so I do look forward to more discussion there, and potentially having somewhat more of a concrete solution to that. As I think that though it's been a small number of people who have attended those meetings, I do hear a lot of concern about that throughout the community in other places as well. So I would definitely be in support of a little more communication, and maybe even an ask for ideas for solutions as well. It'd be interesting to hear that from community members, if they have ideas for solutions or compromises on that front. But thanks again for all your work.
Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thanks for your report. It's captured lots of the input from the public. Particularly the things I've heard about are the overnight parking issues, particularly along Lynn Road and Chesterman, especially if you have visitors or people staying at your house. And I'm talking about staying, just people visiting, not short-term rental stays. And I also share the concerns around the access to the platform and being able to register. I don't know, maybe we could put up a YouTube video guiding people through it or something like that. The final thing that in your report that kind of, I was disappointed to hear that short-term rentals in some cases are, and possibly B&Bs are not providing parking, off-street parking for their guests. That's a requirement of business licensing, and perhaps we need to step up our enforcement in that area. So yeah, thanks for a great report. Great and detailed.
All right, have we hit everybody? I have one comment, and that is I would like to see the overnight parking situation, some solutions come forward, some changes there somehow to help deal with that. And I think it's imperative that, you know, the residents that are truly affected, and including having family members stay over and stuff like that and needing a place to park, I would hate to see that cost them $20 a night in perpetuity. Thank you very much, Mr. Work. Excellent job on this. This is one of the biggest things I've seen in Tofino come through in many, many years. And you've done an excellent job, and the community as a whole has really embraced it by far and large. And I think it's gonna turn out quite well for us. So thank you very much for taking this on and doing such a good job overall. And that is a sincere thank you. So without further ado, I recommend that the staff report beach pay parking program update dated September 28th, 2021 be received for information. Seconded by Councillor Challenger. Any further comments? All in favor? Again, thank you, Mr. Work.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
We have minutes of the Tofino Recreation Commission meeting held September 15th, 2021. I can move that the minutes of the Tofino Recreation Commission meeting held September 15th, 2021 be received. Seconded by Councillor Challenger. Any comments? You have a comment, Councillor Thick? About what? Yeah.
I would like to just say that there was a couple recommendations moved in the minutes, and I'm wondering what the best way to bring those forward for council's attention and discussion. Perhaps would it be a wise thing to ask one of the members to come forward and explain what it is they're interested in pursuing? Or I'm just would like to, that took quite a few months for them to deliberate those motions, and I'm just wondering how best to bring them forward to council for their discussion and just to move those ideas along.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question. Actually, Councillor Steer, I'm just going to answer one of those questions. Just the motions on the table. I'm going to read them out for everybody listening. That Tofino, or that the Recreation Council support, or that council supports the development of a Tofino-based recreation facility, and that council allocates a portion of the paid parking revenue to support the project. I think there's already those are already in discussion. Council does support the development of Tofino-based recreation, and it's in process of being discussed right now. And the appropriate space to talk about paid parking revenue is in the financial planning process. And the second motion, that the district staff be directed to develop a memorandum of understanding with School District 70. That's actually already a motion. I believe that's in process as well. It's been adopted, and I know that in the spring, before the lockdown of this spring, that I was directed by council to meet with ST70 and also staff to seek an MOU. So I think that's all in process going forward, and will be discussed in good timing. That's my opinion. Anything else, Councillor Steer?
No, thank you, Mayor Law. That succinctly puts it. I just, in response to Councillor Thick around, I think it would be important for the Rec Commission to come to council with a delegation just to introduce themselves. There's been a lot of changes at the Rec Commission, and it might be an appropriate time for many of the members of council who haven't heard from the Rec Commission in a long time to come forward to introduce themselves to council. And if they wish to speak towards those, that would be a great time. We've done that historically in the past. A long time ago when I was on the commission, had done several delegations to council over their term. And I think it would be a great idea. So maybe, I don't know, next Rec Commission meeting, Councillor Thick, I would make that suggestion. That they come forward to whether in a committee of the whole or in council. Probably a committee of the whole gives more time to have a less formal back and forth with the commission. So that would be my recommendation to them.
Is that a good enough answer for you there, Councillor Thick?
Yeah, I'd like to do that, and I think that they're one of the few committees or the only commission that has direct access to council, and I think they're a very vibrant group. They have a lot of passion, and I think with some help and direction, we can move things along in a very positive direction for this community. And I think that they really, I think they would appreciate some just concrete sort of support from the council and maybe some direction as to how to proceed further in some of the ideas that they're trying to promote. So I just bring that to you on their behalf.
Super. Those are great ideas, and we'll certainly work on that coming through when we have a little more time in the fall. I think it's good timing. Go ahead, Councillor, or sorry, Miss Tatiana. Jeez.
No problem. Thank you, Mayor Law. It would be helpful if council would like the Rec Commission to come as a delegation to council or an invited presentation to receive some clear direction by way of a motion indicating what you would like the Rec Commission to present on.
Okay, so what we'll do right now is we'll vote on the motion that's before us, and so I'll call the question, and I believe that is that these minutes be received. All in favor? Okay, motion's carried. And then we can make a motion as council to request a delegation of the Tofino Rec Commission at a committee of the whole. Does that suffice?
It would be helpful for staff to know what you would like the Rec Commission to present on, whether it's introduction and what they do, or more detailed than that. Any information would be helpful for us to relay.
Councillor Thick.
Yeah, I think just maybe you could say to discuss the motions to discuss the motions that were put forward to council on the September 28th, 2021 council meeting.
We could do that. I think, I mean, part of the issue is some of those motions we should discuss clearly in, you know, like, as I said, in the financial planning process, or that we've already had, you know, a motion to seek an MOU. So I think that would be a fairly short meeting. But anyway, I'm up for a little broader discussion on, you know, what the Rec Commission would like in general, and the role of the Rec Commission, perhaps, and an introduction, and maybe a little some other things besides these motions. That's that would be my request. But I'm not sure how to deal with this. Perhaps what we can do, noting the time, is. I mean, this is not urgent, is it? No. Okay, so let's put this off to a committee of the whole, and we'll come back and draft a proper motion, and not one on the fly, and that we can get a decent, good meeting that will come out with something something we all can appreciate. Any further ado, we'll move along. Business initiated by council, 1010. We got committee and external verbal reports with council members. This is a standing item, and I believe Councillor Steer, you have two brief.
Yeah, I have two very brief ones. One, we had a community school board meeting late last week, so it didn't get onto the council agenda. Just basically to reiterate that the District of Tofino's funding that we allocate each year, and part of that funding, COVID has, of course, knocked a lot of holes in many of the programming issues, but the Hangout program, for example, is going ahead and it's being offered to more students. It's a super great program that's being allowed through the donations, and that there will be for particular to the District of Tofino and the community use of that gym. Is that after hours programming, so 6 p.m. slot onwards, is once again, there's going to be a program assistant, for lack of a better description, that will be available for that. And so that those programming times are going to be fulfilled. Mostly it's the senior basketball and youth basketball that will be involved there. And another quick one on there was the high school gym, as everyone probably knows, is being renovated as we speak. And so the basketball team's ability to practice, there's an agreement to be able to come and use the school gym here at Wickeninish Elementary. And that was the big ones there. The second one was for Tofino Harbor Authority. Just a quick thing that was very relevant to the District of Tofino. At our board meeting, I had a discussion with our new program manager, the fifth one since I've been on the Harbor Authority since 2018, was around the divestiture talks with small craft harbors, the federal government. Those divestiture talks are on delay now until the minimum 2023. So that has significance for us as the District of Tofino in terms of the talks about those divestiture of Wing and Lane and the Crab Dock around those upland portions that the District of Tofino is probably most concerned about. So that being said, it's on hold until the earliest 2023, late 2022 or 2023. That's it.
Super. Excellent. Okay, let's move to, I don't see any unfinished business. And I believe that brings us to question period, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Mayor Law. We do have two question requests this evening. So the first one we have is from Mr. Ray Thorogood. So Ray, I'm just going to allow you to speak for 2 minutes, and you may ask your questions to council. And please state your name and your address, and you will have 2 minutes to speak to a specific item on the agenda. Ask a question.
Thank you very much. I noticed that no questions were presented to council.
Excuse me, Ray, can you please state your legal address or your residential address?
Yeah, Ray Thorogood, 310 Olson Road, Tofino, BC. But I noticed in the first instance that no questions were asked of council after the CBT presentation. Every resident of Olson Road have voiced their opinion to the CBT and to council that we're against this development, and we informed the CBT of this. 301 Olson Road, twice this property has been twice it's been refused in the recent zoning application from R2. It's been refused. And contrary to what Mr. Rogers was saying, the traffic observation, at least from the CBT to the residents of Olson Road, the traffic observations were taken in early May or early spring. That was according to the CBT. And will the DOT or MOT, whichever, will they be doing the proper traffic survey, or can we rely on the past surveys when the other applications for rezoning were made? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thorogood. So I think the question was, there was some issue with the final question there, issue with whether or not the last parking assessment is valid, and could the residents then refer, or the District of Tofino refer to previous parking assessments from previous applications. And do we have Mr. Rogers here? That's a question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there you go, Mr. Work.
Through you, Mayor Law, I can jump in if Mr. Rogers is okay with that. I can talk a little bit about the transportation concerns raised. As I understand it, there's there's two discretely different conversations going on about the transportation in and around Olson and the highway. One is the safety issues and concerns raised by residents and other users of the right-of-way at the corner of Olson and the highway. And two, the issues related to this particular development specifically. The review of the traffic study to date includes some assessment and profiling of the time that the transportation consultant did the review and what that might look like as far as peak seasons. And I have no reason necessarily to question their assessments about what the development pressures would result as far as increased traffic and increased parking as associated with the development of the CBT proposed building and its functions. I would, however, highlight that there is an ongoing concern about the safety of turning movements associated with the on Olson and off of Olson at this location that have nothing to do with this development. So we are working with MOTI to determine if and what future considerations should be made to improve the safety of turning movements at this location, which are nominally a result of a dip in the road at Olson. So the elevation of the Olson intersection being lower than both the north and south preceding vehicle lanes. And this is exacerbated by, of course, a turn in both directions as well. So this has been raised as an issue when the transportation consultants did their review, and it's been a known issue for the district in talking with MOTI about what we may want to do in the future. And I think it's important to distinctively separate those two issues about what are the impacts related to this particular development and where they kind of intersect. And what's interesting is, do we have any information that would suggest that the introduction of this development tips the overall safety concerns or issues associated with the corner of Olson and the highway? And I think our conversations with the consultants would suggest that it does not. So I think where I'm sitting right now as the engineer is looking forward to what we should be talking with MOTI about when it comes to overall safety in that area. But I would say that the development itself is supportable and doesn't necessarily exacerbate the issues to the point where we would be concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Work. Do we have another somebody else signed up for a question period?
Thank you, Mayor Law. Yes, we have one more, Mr. Ben Eggers. So, Mr. Eggers, please, once I allow you to speak, state your name and your residential address, and you'll have 2 minutes to ask questions to council.
Hi, good evening, council. Yeah, my name's
Hello,
Ben.
good evening.
Hey, yeah, I'm Ben, speaking on behalf of Jamie Eggers and I. We are at 321 Olson Road here in Tofino, 2 doors down from the proposed CBT Biosphere Trust rezoning development at 301. Hey, thanks for taking the time. It's been a big evening for you tonight. Our main concern here is with this proposed rezoning is with building mass and the precedent that that sets within our neighborhood. I think most of our other neighbors feel the same way about the size of this development. The current proposed size of the Biosphere Center at 881 square meters is similar in size to the kind of controversial RCMP compound in the middle of downtown Tofino. A building of this size at the top of Olson Road would have a huge impact on local residents. So we have 2 questions for you. How would this proposed development impact future rezoning applications in residential neighborhoods? And if this is approved, will this be the new standard of permittable build size with minimal setbacks and excessive lot coverage in residential neighborhoods?
Thank you for those questions, Mr. Eggers. And those are interesting. How would you impact, how do we answer those questions? Perhaps Mr. Rogers can take a stab.
Thanks, Ben, for your questions. zoning, this doesn't set a precedent. So in Tofino, because our zoning bylaw and OCP are not aligned, we tend to look at zonings like this on a lot by lot basis. And so the Crab Dock, and again, I hesitate to use your neighborhood, the Crab Dock Street, which is about 7 or 8 residents, consists of residential, commercial accommodation in terms of short-term rentals, and specifically commercial accommodation down on the shore. And so this is a neighborhood that's mixed already, but it's mixed towards a commercial residential use at this point. So something new, like an institutional use along the highway, is different. And I wouldn't use that as a measuring stick to try to determine what future rezoning applications might look like. That's a determination that we make a staff at a lot by lot level, and then again always the council for their decision making. I think this is a tough application in a lot of ways for the existing residents and the existing street. It's a corner that's lined up with a lot of our sort of Campbell Street frontage type conversations. And so as you enter into Tofino, that kind of brings you to Tofino proper. And so there is that consideration for having a building like this in that location. So I don't know if that answers your question. That's how we would approach it in the future. Again, this doesn't set precedent. This is a site specific zone for this specific lot.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. And thank you, Mr. Eggers, for your questions. That's it for question period, I believe. Ms. Best?
Thank you, Mayor Lau. That's all of the submitted questions for this evening.
Okay, well then I'm going to move us into the closed session. So I recommend that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 91A, C, D, F, K, and 92B of the Community Charter to discuss matters related to personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employer, agent, employee relations, the security of the property of the municipality, law enforcement. If the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the conduct of an investigation or enforcement of an enactment, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages, and that in the view of the council could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public, and the consideration of information received and held in confidence relating to negotiations between the municipality and a provincial government or the federal government or both, or between a provincial government or the federal government or both and a third party. Seconder? Seconded by Councillor Challenger. All in favor? Excellent. So we're going to move into closed session.
Thank you, Mayor Lau. If we can now have a 2-minute recess so I can reset the meeting and stop live streaming. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You guys want to have a little drink break, or?
Do we need to make a motion? Are we at our 3-hour limit?
We have a 4-hour limit, actually.
My mistake.